to the September 10, 2018 Board of Selectmen's meeting. We're starting in the open session and going right to executive session under General Laws, Chapter 38, Section 21A3 for review and discussion of Elijah Smith legal claim. As chair, I declare that to not go into executive session would prejudice the town's claim, and we will return to open session thereafter.
Second.
Patterson, aye.
English Braga, aye.
Moran, aye.
Jones, aye.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the Monday, September 10, 2018 Board of Selectmen meeting. We just returned from executive session, and we're starting the 7 o'clock open session. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Braga.
Just for recognition tonight, wanted to just say a few words about Walter Crotty, who passed away last month in August. Walter was someone who, in his retirement, he really embodied one of the great things about Falmouth, which is sometimes people come here to this town to kind of have a second career in service to their community, and Walter really did that. He was deeply involved with youth in terms of school committee and working with the schools on the rec committee, really focused on sports, and just making sure that this town kind of upheld its commitment to our young folks, particularly around the area of activity and sports and that piece of our town that we're so proud of. And Walter really dedicated a lot of time to that. He was always someone who had insight to share, whether it was at our meetings or at town meeting. So certainly he will be missed, and we send our condolences to his wife and his family, and we certainly hope that they know that he made a very lasting impact here in our town for the time that he was living here. So just a moment of silence for Walter Crotty.
Thank you. Next, we have on the agenda announcements. Doug?
Just to put a warning out there, I know the police department also put this warning out on Facebook. Just a reminder to people about IRS scams, that if you're called at home and told that you owe money to the IRS and you need to wire it, don't. IRS will never call you at home. They will not ask you to send them money. And also, personal connection. My mother received a phone call today, supposedly from my son, with a young man crying, saying, "This is your grandson, you need to send me money to Florida." And just watch out for these people. They're horrendous, despicable people who are looking at trying to attack older people who care about their grandchildren and trying to get them sending money. And do not wire anybody to anyone if someone calls for these kinds of issues.
Important announcement. Anyone else announcement here?
Yes, just a reminder that the Senior Center has its open house on September 17th, 3 to 6 p.m. at the current Senior Center on Dillingham Avenue. Really always a fun event. You can come, learn about the events that the Senior Center has, all of the activities, meet the individuals who work there and some of the folks who attend and participate in those activities. So September 17th, open to anyone, 3 to 6 p.m.
Good opportunity to check it out. Peter, did you want to make an announcement about the
Sure.
changes in the space?
Yes. So pardon our appearance, half step back in order to make 2 steps forward. We're in the process of installing upgrades to our audio video systems. So for today, we do not have a live broadcast, and the audio is going to be from the one microphone by the camera. But by the next Selectmen meeting, we will have the new system fully installed, which will provide better audio and better display that really makes it easier for everyone in the room to be able to see what's going on and provide higher quality image and sound for the broadcast as well as inside the room.
And thanks for all your efforts on that. Appreciate it very much. Anything else? Okay, the next item on the agenda is public comment. Public comment is an opportunity to speak on a matter that's not on the agenda. There's a total of 10 minutes allowed. 2 minutes per person, alternating subjects. Personal remarks about any member of the board, person having business before the board, or any other identified individual are not allowed. Is there anyone who would like to make public comment this evening? Seeing none, we will move to the first item under summary of actions, which is licenses. We have an application for 12 special one-day wine and malt liquor licenses for On the Water Outfitters at 707 T-Ticket Highway. Fun on the Water, Customer Appreciation Open House, 1 per month from September through August 2019. Is the applicant here? Now, Mr. Suso, is this something that we had previously had on the agenda? We were looking at the policy and asked for the proponent to come and answer some questions that the board had.
Yes, we had made that inquiry.
So maybe let's continue this for another month and make it, give them another opportunity to appear before the board and answer questions.
We did send them a letter asking them to be here between 7:15 and 7:30. So it may be something we should just table to see if they're.
Oh, we can do that, in case they're,
So moved
So I
then?
move that we table.
Second.
great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great idea. Next, we have an application for a new entertainment license for Josh's at Davisville, 339 East Falmouth Highway. Is the applicant here? Okay, what does the board like to do with this?
Well, it's for an entertainment license, and it's acoustic rather than amplified music. I see any problem issuing this. Can we move approval?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Great. Next, we have on the agenda an application for a special one-day wine and malt liquor license for 13 River Street LLC, doing business as International Cycling, Cape Cod Fairgrounds, for Saturday, November 3rd, 2018, and Sunday, November 4th, 2018. Is the applicant here? Okay, what's the board's pleasure?
This is being held at the fairground, and so I think they have the proper facilities to manage this. So I would move approval as condition.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have under administrative orders, whether to approve a request for a waiver of building permit fees for 72 Deer Pond Road. Mr. Suso, would you tear that up for us?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We received a request from this applicant for the waiver of fees. They are a private nonprofit corporation proposing to build a single-family affordable home on this site. Consistent with the Selectmen's written policy, we did an internal review, and this applicant has conforms to all the requirements, and based upon that, I recommend your favorable consideration. I will underscore as a reminder that your policy does not include inspectional fees, but only the building permit fees, if that's your desire to proceed in that manner.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
I would move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have a vote to accept a donation from the Falmouth Triathlon New England Endurance Events in the amount of $1,400 to the Beach Department donation account. Is there someone here from the triathlon? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Move approval with thanks.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we have a vote to authorize town council and town manager to respond to an open meeting law complaint received by the Board of Selectmen on August 21st, 2018.
Move approval to authorize.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have under special events, new and recommended, a beach wedding ceremony for Roman at Minot Beach on Saturday, October 6, 2018.
And it looks like all of the relevant department heads have weighed in and they don't have problems with it, so I would move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, I see Ms. Petit is here. Let's see here. We'll move to the discussion of the fiscal year 2020 budget policy. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening.
I hate to suggest this, but it is listed on our agenda for 7:45, and I just worry that if there are people that are hoping to hear this policy, we might want to come closer to that time than, maybe we got 25 or 35 minutes.
Can we do
A lot
some-
of those matters.
Can we
We've
do
got
some of the
Well,
ones
the
on
vote,
the back?
Shellfish.
certainly voting the articles next year's warrant is really a pro forma thing that takes us about 10, 15 minutes, we just have to do. All we're doing is putting the articles on the warrant.
That's a
We
good
actually don't
suggestion.
discuss them,
Yep.
we can't debate them,
Well, we might want to order them,
right. yeah.
is the only thing.
But that's always been our discussion, is not something that we have the public involved in that discussion.
Correct.
That's a
And
good
it takes a little
suggestion.
bit of some time.
All right, let's hold.
And just so we're a little closer to the,
That's a good alternative.
That makes sense, so let's move up to vote the articles.
We just go through, can someone just remind me, do we go through each article? We do it per page, or how do we?
Can we
Sure.
raise
Sam?
a blanket issue in going through some of these? It's sort of like the question of governance. It seems frequently that the contact person is the board and not staff members. And I'm bothered by the fact that if you have somebody that wants to file an application or raise an issue, they should be going to the staff member and not to some amorphous board that doesn't even necessarily have a post office box or an assigned assistant to respond to that. So I just would ask us to go through here and scrub this a little bit, scrub the articles to make sure, and I was particularly looking at the article on that the planning board submitted.
Would it make sense to take that up as we're going through?
We can do that, and I have noted it as we go through, but, you know,
I think
to
that-
Doug's comments, we normally don't get into what the articles are about. I just wanted to mention that as a broad thing that I went through, as I went through, frequently was referencing back to the particular board and not to the staff, the department that would be responsible for it within town hall, particularly the planning board.
I guess I'm not sure I understand your point.
Okay,
Because
well,
these are just draft articles that are often placeholders, and we'll see a very different article when we actually get to the warrant.
I only raise this because I think we should have that in mind as we go through them
Okay.
and refine the articles. But it had, you know, it had to do with, let me just get to the particular one so we have an example and you'll see what I mean. Well,
Maybe if we
maybe
go
we'll
through
have
it,
to
it'll
wait,
come.
yeah.
We can-
Let's just wait till we come to the article and then I'll
And you
pick
can
up on
bring
it
it up
because I have it
then.
in my notes here.
That's
My
fine.
apologies.
All right, so let's just go through page by page.
Sure.
Okay, so looking at Articles 1 through 8. Is there anything anyone wants to renumber, or,
I would move we put Articles 1 through 7. Article 8 is a very lengthy one, I was just going to mention what the topic of that one is.
all right, so
But
let's
Articles
do,
1 through 7 are new,
okay,
pro forma.
pro forma.
Right.
So 1 through 7, and the second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
I would mention as we think about reordering that Article 4, it is the capital budget, and it occurs right after this normal pro forma things that we have at the beginning of town meeting. I don't know whether that's where we want it or not.
What would be your suggestion?
I actually have no problem with it being there,
Okay,
but normally when we get into budget, it's usually further on in the warrant, and it's up front in this particular case. I have no problem, I'd like to see it done right in front.
I actually thought we had a complaint that we kept putting it later in the evening as opposed to early in the evening. when it's
we
such an
have,
important
so I
thing.
think this is an effort to move it up a little bit.
Good, I like it.
Great. All right, so we've taken care of 1 through 7. Let's talk about 8.
Which is the ground-mounted solar, the issue with the solar array district, amending the zoning map.
And actually, it's this article that caught my eye, because referenced in this article is the site plan review authority. Now, I have no idea who that is. And it seems like that needs to be the planning department.
Mr. Duffy, I wonder if you would speak to the solar articles, because I know there was also a proponent's request that there be consideration with respect to numbering, and I know that the town manager wanted to weigh in on that as well.
With this, Frank Duffy, Town Council, with the specific comment from Mr. Patterson, the zoning bylaw has a specific provision on site plan review. The site plan review authority is the planning board, and there's another section of the zoning bylaw that provides for and identifies the site plan review authority. I agree, if you just looked at this one page, you might be puzzled, but if you read the whole bylaw, it all falls in place.
Okay?
It would.
But if you addressed your questions as site plan review authority, who would actually answer that mail?
It goes to the planning board. It's the
The
board.
board or the department?
No, it's the planning board. They hold a hearing.
And then would you just describe for us that, I think there were 4 articles that have to do with...
There are 4 articles. You remember at the last town meeting, there was an article proposed by the petitioner, one of the petitioners, Lawrence Lynch, to provide for solar photovoltaic array. The planning board actually approved that article and recommended it be approved. However, during the debate at town meeting, a number of people had questions, and in the end, it failed to gather the 2/3 majority, and it did not pass. The proponent, Lawrence Lynch, still wants to build a solar photovoltaic array up off Blacksmith Shop Road, and they do have a petitioner's article in here too. But in the meantime, the planning board tasked the town planner, Thomas Bott, to come up with an article for the board. So Article 8 is the planning board's article to create an overlay district where solar would be permitted by special permit. And it goes on in some detail about the terms and conditions of approval, such things as siting and operation and maintenance and liability insurance, dimensional requirements, and so forth. Basically, what the planning board is trying to do is they have gone through certain areas of town where there's quite a bit of disturbance, primarily as a result of previous sand pit, where all the gravel was mined out and there's open space. And they would impose this overlay district over these large parcels as suitable for solar overlays. The planning board did propose this article. They will be holding public hearings on it. They have not yet formulated their recommendation, but it's their article.
Now, in another area, the planning board has also proposed a moratorium.
All right. The moratorium, it's my understanding, I don't know if there's anybody here from the planning board that could answer, Mr. Paul Dreyer is here. My understanding that if the Article 8 does not pass, then the planning board would ask that there be a moratorium on solar articles for at least 1 year to allow them to come back with another one, perhaps that might solve some of the problems that were raised at the town meeting. Now, following that, there were 2 articles, one from Mr. Zweig and another one from Lawrence Lynch that are petitioner's articles to accomplish the same thing, to allow solar arrays in certain districts. I did receive today, and I passed on to you through Mr. Suso, a comment from the Lawrence Lynch Company that they would like to have you put the moratorium on last rather than second in order. So, because if it's second, it effectively blocks town meeting from considering their petitioner's article.
So right now it's Article 9.
Right now it's Article 9.
Right.
I don't have a position on that. That's solely your discretion.
Mr. Sousa, did you have a position on that?
Well, only subject certainly to the planning board weighing in. I'm presuming that's exactly what the intent is when the planning board's by positioning it that way. So, but as Mr. Duffy's indicated, ultimately it's up to this board how you prefer to proceed.
Mr. Dwight, do you want to be heard on this?
planning board. I think what been said is accurate, that's a backup condition if the one article doesn't pass, it's going to be a moratorium, but the intent is not to have a moratorium to stop solar arrays anywhere in town. I think that's a misunderstanding, but the intent is to go forward with the district that we're trying to develop. It's not fully approved by the planning board, we'll be discussing it tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sam?
Paul, since you're here, I might just pass this on, but I think something that's been left out of this article is the whole question of any toxic liquids that might actually dump out of a transformer, for instance. Those have some pretty toxic electrolytes in them. And so I think there needs to be an addition that requires the submission of material data safety sheets for all liquids and finishes that could be filed with the planning board and with the Board of Health in case there's an accident. But as a condition of being granted the permit to create one of these arrays, because it could be
We're
something.
getting a little,
Yeah.
we're getting into discussing the
Well,
articles,
no,
so,
just-
right, we're just ordering tonight.
I'll be glad to bring it up tomorrow night at the meeting.
Great.
So just in terms of the order, I think whatever kind of uses our time most efficiently at town meetings, so it certainly doesn't make sense to have a large debate about something that is then going to be moved because of a subsequent vote. So I think we need to,
Focus on that.
Yeah.
I would move to put Article 8 is listed as Article 8, Article 10 is 9, Article 11 is 10, and Article 9 as 11.
I'd agree with that.
The moratorium is after it. If we can get one of these other three passed with agreement from the town meeting, then we can move forward. If we can't, then a moratorium makes sense.
It'll allay those concerns as
Great.
well.
I'll second that.
All right, so that'll take all those in favor? Right.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, that takes
Aye.
care of up through 10.
Yeah, up through 11.
through 11.
Or 11, right. Okay, 12 is a petitioner's article brought by Grant Walker. And let's see, it's about caps on megawatts eligible for net metering.
That deals with solar as well.
So that
So
makes sense
maybe it makes sense to be there.
to be
Oh, but
at 12.
But that metering extends to residential, smaller arrays that fall under a different category, so I don't think we necessarily have to put that in conjunction with the other.
No, it's a good place.
But it's a good-
Okay, we can put
Leave it
together.
where it is, just leave it where, as 12.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so we'll take that as a motion then, all those in favor?
Aye.
So 13, motion to amend zoning bylaw with respect to dimensional regulations on behalf of the planning board.
And 14 is accessory apartments. I would move we add Article 13 and 14
Second.
to the warrant.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, 15 is a petition of Attorney Kevin Clower, whether the town will vote to amend Article 6, General Residence Districts of Chapter 240 zoning by adding accessory apartment to that
I
area.
think it should stay exactly where it is. It's in conjunction with those other similar topics.
I agree.
So I would add it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
16 is to see if the town will vote to amend the town's position classification plan for adjusting seasonal compensation schedule with respect to parking attendant, clerk, and various other positions.
I would move 16 and 17 because those are both about classification, so I think that they're ordered correctly.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have Article 18. See if the town will vote to accept provisions of Chapter 139 of the Acts of 2012 to increase from $6,000 to $12,000 the benefit payable to surviving spouses of disabled public employees, and that's on request of the Falmouth Contributory Retirement
I would
Board.
move approval of where it is because it's in line with similar sort of money employment matter.
Second.
Now, from 19, 20, 21, and 22, is there anyone that wants to make any particular changes?
No, I would move we add Articles 19, 20, 21, 22 to the warrant.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye. Did we all vote Article 18?
Yes, we did. That was the one I just had.
Yeah, but I didn't hear a vote, that's all.
Oh, we may not, maybe we didn't vote on 18.
Well, we can vote it again. Sure. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
On to 23, to phase out polystyrene and polystyrene foam.
Petitioner's
This
article.
is a petitioner's article for Malcolm Donald. Okay?
I move putting Article 23 on the warrant.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next is Article 24, ranked choice voting, and that is a petitioner's article as well for Malcolm Donald. Is that
Move approval?
position?
Yep, I'm sorry.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have Article 25. Whether to amend the official zoning map of the town of Falmouth with respect to Business 3 District rezoning.
Again, this is a petitioner's article.
Kevin Clower. Is that in the right place, people?
Yep.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next we have Article 26 to create solid waste division within Public Works. This is on petition of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And then 27 is a petitioner's article by Mark Finneran with respect to authorizing use of second water meters. Are those two in the right places?
I would actually, if I could just jump ahead, I would just move Article 26 through 32. I think they're all appropriately positioned.
Is there a second?
Just discussion real quick. Shouldn't this, since it involves changing around of staff and potentially adding a staff member, be up with the classification chart?
You're talking about 26?
I'm talking about 26, yeah. It says, to ask the town to create a solid waste division within the Department of Public Works.
But
No
it's a-
salary, no,
Right, it
no
doesn't-
contract, no salary, no
Okay.
no relationship to that. So I understand your point, but if it were creating new positions, I would agree with you completely, but it isn't.
And I think it's also blocked nicely with a string of petitioners' articles.
Well, solid waste committee is not individual petitioners. Anyway,
All
okay.
right, so there's a
No
motion
problem.
to move the balance in the order set. And there's a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. I just want to make an announcement for On the Water. We moved a little quickly, and we're holding yours till after the 7:30 hearing.
That's fine. Thank you.
Pardon? Right. Frank, did you have a chance to discuss anything with the parties for the public hearing?
Maybe in the hall.
Actually, I'm not sure I know who they are. At least I haven't seen anybody.
Are both attorneys here for the public hearing meeting?
On the docks?
Yeah.
Could you raise your hand if you're an attorney? Frank, we've got one here.
It's a civil engineer.
Mr. Verselli, is the attorney here? Okay.
Walls in the hall.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Wall.
Council, before we get started, we wanted to let you know we do have an absent member this evening, and we wanted to know whether you want to proceed on that basis.
We would like to proceed.
Thank you.
Right.
Super. In that case, I'm going to call this 7:30 public hearing. It's a wetlands hearing. Stephen Ballas, Michael Cachadorian, number 64, lot 77, Muskegon Road, East Falmouth. Proposed ramp and float, Eel Pond. It's continued from August 6, 2018. Public hearing notices as follows. Falmouth Board of Selectmen will hold a public hearing under section 4300, which is the wetland regulations of the zoning bylaws of the town of Falmouth on August 6, 2018 at 7:30 p.m. in the Falmouth Town Hall. And the application is Stephen Bayless and Michael Cachadorian for the proposed ramp and float located at number 64 and lot 77 Muskegon Road, East Falmouth. Area affected is Eel Pond. Interested parties may review the file of this matter at the Selectmen's office for order of the Board of Selectmen. Publication dates were July 13 and July 20, 2018. And please let the record reflect that council has elected to proceed, notwithstanding the fact that we do have one board member that is not in attendance this evening. Welcome.
Welcome, thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Brian Wall, and I represent the two applicants in this matter who are here with me tonight. Also representing the applicants is Michael Verselli from Falmouth Engineering. As the chair said, there was a full hearing back on August 6th, and we don't intend to go over or rehash everything that we said the last time. But I do have 2 points to make. The first of which is it's our understanding that the reason that the hearing was continued was because an individual named Kevin Murphy spoke at the podium where I am now and referenced a requirement that if you are the butter and someone is proposing a dock within 50 feet of your property line, that the written approval of that abutter is required. And I had suggested at the hearing last time that I was unaware of such a requirement, but you asked for town council's opinion, and I understand town council has given an opinion. I've seen an email in the file where he indicates that there is no such town bylaw or rule, and he suggests, as I did in the letter that I submitted to the board on the same point, that it's actually a DEP requirement. So I think that was the sole reason for the continuance. But having said that, the second point that I wanted to make was the board heard a lot of testimony the last time through about the channel being crowded, and that if this application is approved, that it's essentially going to overload the channel and make it difficult. And we took the time between the last hearing and this hearing to further investigate the legality of the floats that are in the channel. And if I could, there's no microphone, can I walk around? Is there new technology available?
Right.
So we have this chalk, this exhibit, and for the record, we have an exhibit to put in. And you can see at this particular end is where the proposed pier will be. At the terminal end, this is Mr. Cacciatorian's vacant lot. This is the
I'm
lot.
sorry, I can't see.
She can have mine.
No, that's okay, I look good.
I'll try to stand
Thank you.
over here. This is the pier that's being proposed. This is Mr. Cacciatorian's vacant lot. This is Mr. Bayless's property here. And what are shown outlined in red are actual floats that are in the water. So Mr. Penticus was here last time and mentioned these two floats. Mr. Dundalis has these 3 floats here, and so on and so forth. What I did was I worked with a title examiner, and I asked the title examiner to go to the Registry of Deeds and research each one of the properties on the canal to find out what exactly is there lawfully. And what I found out was that this property here, Mr. Penticus, has no permits, so he has no Chapter 91 license, no wetlands permit, and no zoning permit. The same is true for Mr. and Mrs. Nada, with the exception that they have a Chapter 91 license for these 2 globe floats, but again, no zoning permit, no wetland permit. This property here, Deborah Iapini, same thing, there are no permits whatsoever for the floats. And Mr. Dundalis has the 3 floats, and he has a Chapter 91 license for 2 that are half the size of the floats that are in the water, no wetlands permits and no zoning permits. So the point that I would like to make is that I think it's somewhat ironic that the abutters that are coming in that are opposed to this project are essentially asking you, the Board of Selectmen, to exercise your authority under the zoning bylaw to regulate the aquatic resources of the town in a fair and equitable manner to protect their use of the channel. But when you look at what's actually there, there is no lawful zoning permits whatsoever in the entire channel. So what do we think an appropriate solution to this is? We would ask that the board exercise its discretion to grant our clients the permit because they're here trying to follow the right rules. They have an order of conditions from the board, the Conservation Commission. They're asking for a zoning permit from you, and they then will go to the Chapter 91 process to have their license issued. All of the other property owners, frankly, need to come before you and ask you for a special permit for their floats, and you can exercise your authority to be fair and equitable to everyone and let everyone have an appropriate amount of floats in the water with an appropriate amount of boats. And if that were done, there's enough room in the channel for everyone to have a boat. And that's our presentation. We're available for questions, and we reserve the right to rebut if there's some new information put in by the project.
I just want to make a quick comment, just so that folks know that we did receive right after the meeting a correction regarding the width of the channel. I think it had been misstated that it was 78 feet. In fact, it was closer to 68 feet. And I just wanted to make sure that folks know that was corrected immediately, really following that meeting. So we've had that information in front of us. We've been working from that corrected information.
Thank you very much. And to that, further to that point, Mr. Borselli's here. If you recall, he was asked to scale it on the fly.
Right.
And so it was a mistake made during the heat of a public hearing. And when we realized that, the very next day, we sent an email correcting that.
Any other questions? Is there anyone here in the audience who would like to speak with respect to the comments that were just made by council? Ma'am? Go ahead.
The comments made by
No, you
him?
have to speak from the podium if you don't mind.
Well, I don't have comments.
From the podium, ma'am?
Okay.
Oops. No, ask.
You can both come up if you want, rather than trying to.
You need to identify yourself.
I'm Shirley Matter.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm here because this is
I'm Leslie Matter.
I'm here because this is a hardship case. I've sat on that side. I've been there for 33 years, and we've never had a boating accident until last Saturday. I've lived there for 33 years.
And our dogs are registered.
And our dogs are registered. My husband ran the VA hospital as the chief engineer and in charge of OSHA and safety. He wouldn't have done anything illegal.
Ma'am,
First
would you-
of all,
pardon me just for a minute, would you point to which area?
Where I live,
Is yours, yes, please, so we.
I live where he said I'm not registered.
Well, I want to know first, don't have your back to the people.
I'm sorry.
You know,
Which-
still.
On that chart, which
I
one
would
is
like to
yours?
know, when you pointed to this, well, what did you mean by this? Because you pointed
You
here
gotta
and
address
said
me,
the
ma'am.
map. Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'm asking you, where's your property?
Right here,
Thank you. And did you have a question for the attorney?
yes,
What is it?
first time, sorry.
That's quite all right.
I would like to know, when you spoke about these docks, these two specifically, you said, what?
May I rise, Madam
Yeah.
Chair?
Yes.
So the title examiner that did the research for me found for the Mata property, they have an interim approval, Chapter 91 license for a seawall and for 2 5 by 12 foot floats. No orders of conditions for the floats and no zoning permits.
Okay.
So
and
the
this-
two gold
this-
floats that are shown represent the 2 5 by 12 floats that have a Chapter 91 license.
So we have two licenses.
We have two licenses, and,
One for a seawall and one for the floats, correct?
okay.
Okay, regardless, this is a hardship on us. 6 families that have lived there, never had a problem. Now we're gonna have a problem. I was a lifeguard. I taught safety. I just saved 2 kids in Florida in January. I did an underwater approach because they were in 9 feet of water. I might be 80, but I can still do it. Listen, you have a dock, a boat, you have another boat coming in, we don't know the size of it, a dock and another boat, we don't know the size of that boat, 5 feet, a boat, and another dock. Honey, I'll go in and save anyone's life, but I can't get in there because there's only 5 feet between.
Thank you. Anything else?
If anyone saw on the news the past few days in Pasco County, Florida, a similar situation, which is what she's talking about, happened. And the amount of space between the boat and the docks, it's a major safety issue, especially with this being a man-made canal and the mucky water. It's very, very difficult.
There's no
But-
visibility.
On top of it, for the first time last weekend, I know it was not anyone that owned a residence on the canal. I saw a boat, a single engine whaler come down, and it looked like they were scouting, because no one, unless it's someone on our canal, was down there. And they tried to do like a 3-point turn, and I've driven a Zodiac and a whaler, so when you go front and you turn and you back up, before my family's docks, which is, sorry, this section, there was a complete open spot, but instead they decided to go to the end. They took a sharp left, tried to back up. They just missed the boat on one side, and on the other side, they whacked, and I say whacked, our neighbor's dock. I was in such shock, because I'd never seen that there before. And like I said, that was just a single engine whaler.
Thank you. Any questions for these folks that are speaking now from the board? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to know the size of the boats that are coming in, if they do get in. They better be canoes, because boats aren't going to fit. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir?
Good evening, Madam Chairman. My name is Drew White. I represent the Dundulises and Mr. Penticus. And I just want to respond to what Attorney Wall had said with respect to the status of the floats.
Thank you.
The Dundulis floats are fully permitted and licensed, by which I mean they have from the Conservation Commission a negative determination of applicability, which I have a copy of and will give to you. They have from they have the Selectmen's approval, and they have their Chapter 91 license. So they have all the approvals required for the 2 floats that are shaded here. Mr. Dundulis has a negative determination of applicability from Conservation Commission for his 2 floats. So what Attorney Wall has said is inaccurate to the extent he said there was that those were lacking. A determination of applicability and the negative is what you need from Conservation Commission. It's as good as an order of conditions.
I don't think it is. I think a determination of applicability is different than order of conditions. And so there was no order of conditions granted for those. A determination of applicability just means, is it something that needs to go forward, as I understand it. It is not they've granted a license for it. It is the step before they've granted that license.
Well, when it's a negative determination of applicability, it's a determination that no order of conditions is needed.
Okay.
And therefore that is,
And you have that
we have that for both the Dundulis and Penticus floats. And as I said, for the Dundulis floats, I also have, and we'll give to you a 1995 approval from this board for their floats.
And you have those to submit?
Yes.
And Meg, can I clarify, obviously we'll be able to clarify when we look at it, but, so, part of what I think is somewhat, not necessarily confusing, but somewhat contradictory, is that it looks like what may be approved is not what's actually in existence. So, so in other words, I see you kind of pointing, so those gold floats seem
Right.
to be kind of the gold is what's possibly approved, whereas the red is what's in existence.
Right.
Is that fair to say that that's accurate?
That is correct.
Okay.
And obviously there's no claim to entitlement to more than what's permitted. and
Understood. No, I
licensed.
just wanted to clarify what you were saying about what they had.
So I can hand you the negative determination of applicability and the selectmen's approval for the Dundulis flood. I do not have with me on hand a copy of the negative determination for Mr. Penticus, but that can readily be provided.
Okay, we'll take that. Thank you, counsel. Any questions for counsel from the board?
No, I would just ask, is there any paperwork that you have from your title examiner, counsel?
No, I don't, because negative determinations don't have to be recorded, so that's why I didn't find those. I did not dispute what Attorney Boyd said, but my recollection and understanding is that if you get a special permit, you're supposed to record that. And my title examiner did not find any float permit for for either Mr. Douglas or Pincus. And then even if he did, as you correctly pointed out, it's for the 2 gold floats, not the 3 red ones that are in the water.
But you would agree with their statement that the negative determination of applicability would mean that there would not need to be a order of conditions from the Conservation Commission?
Not necessarily. What negative determination means is that whatever the applicant wrote as far as their application did not warrant an order of conditions, as Attorney Boyd said. I don't know what are in those because they weren't recorded.
Right.
And so I haven't had an opportunity to see those.
The both attorneys are saying the same thing, is that there would not have been in a title search any recording of anything. You
Correct.
don't record the negative applicability.
Correct.
And if what they've applied for is what they've done, then everything would be fine with that.
Correct.
Mr. Duffy, did you want to speak to that?
I might point out that since that liaison under the Conservation Commission, their focus is basically on protecting the natural resource.
Frank Duffy, Town Council, I think the comments that you've received here, the negative determination of applicability is determined based upon what they applied for. And if there is a negative determination, it typically would not be recorded in the Registry of Deeds to find account for the fact that Mr. Wall type examiner could find it. As far as a special permit from this board, if it is issued under Chapter 240-77, which is the Wetlands Bylaw, it must be recorded in the Registry of Deeds to take effect. So the fact that it is not there is kind of troubling to me, if it is not there.
Thank you. Okay.
And can I just amend my comment, because I actually forgot to say one.
Sure, at the
thing.
podium, sir.
Madam Chairman, my only other remark would be that with respect to these other red boxes where there appear to be, where the suggestion was that they're there without necessary permits, the other consideration I would just note is that under the Zoning Act, a structure that has been in place for 10 years is grandfathered in any case. So to the extent that some of these floats have been in there for a long time, 10 years, those would be grandfathered by statute. Now, I don't believe that's the case for Mr. Penticus's floats. With respect to these other floats, I don't know, the owners may be able to speak to that, and council can confirm that provision of the statute that grandfathers items that have been in place for 10 years, notwithstanding that they may not have obtained the requisite permits.
And which lot are you directing your comment to? Which is
Only to these, to the extent that they were there for 10 years or more, which I don't know, but since we're talking about them, which we haven't in the prior hearing talked about these other floats, and the owners are here, they may be able to speak to how long they have been in the water and whether they are in fact grandfathered.
Okay, thank you.
Another question, I'm not sure whether the attorneys want to answer it or the particular owners. I was there yesterday, and it is very, very crowded. Some of my concern about the crowded nature of it is some of those boats are not owned by the property owners. And I guess I'm concerned as to who those boats are, and are they being rented out, or is it just as a free gift that these people are able to put their boats there?
Before we get to that, Frank, would you please come in and speak to the importance of Doug's question in this review?
Right, whose boats they are?
Right. What, in other words, if a property owner has a licensed dock and makes a separate agreement for a third party to use it, how does that bear on our review?
Well, I wasn't prepared to answer the specific question, but the first thing that comes to mind is that you may have a situation of a commercial enterprise in a residential district, which is something that I would like to look into before I specifically answer it. But typically, if you have a dock associated with a private residence, it's assumed, or at least presumed, that that dock will be used by the occupant of the house and not rented out as a commercial enterprise.
Thank you. And counsel, could you answer Selectman Jones' question? Do you have
sorry.
the answer to that question?
I'm sorry, and I'm afraid I'll have to ask for the question to be repeated, but I will try to answer it.
Sure.
The boats that are not owned by the property owners. How are those boats there? And what kind of agreement are those other boats there? Is it a fee-based or is it a gratis? Is it a free? Fee or free?
Free. In the case of the Dunbillis, it's not, it's not always, I believe they can speak to this, but your son has a boat that's sometimes there, and you have a friend who has a boat that's sometimes there.
Folks and council, if you want to have information from someone, please call them up. Thank you.
But the answer to your question is free in both cases.
Is there anyone else who would like to start?
Hi, my name is Steve Bayless. I'm the owner of this property here and one of the co-applicants. I've owned the property for about 8 years. It's been my primary residence for a number, 3 years or so, 4 years, something like that. I'd like to speak to this notion of free. I'm at home a lot. I observe a lot of crazy things in this canal. Where there is no particular licensed feature here and the 3 docks are actually in the water, that's where that 40-some-odd foot boat is that spends, most of the year with his salon facing directly into my living room. That owner told me one time that since he couldn't put his boat there because it had too deep a draft, he wanted to get some use out of it. He didn't say what the consideration was, but the drift that I got was it was not a free situation. Here, if you call free the undocumented transfer of money, well then maybe he's got me there, but I have seen the predecessor to this particular, the boat that's on this dock, he had been there for years. It was a large boat. I observed him plenty of times working on the dock, pulling out stakes, putting new stakes in, reconfiguring things. That's a transfer of consideration if you ask me. It wasn't Dunbillis, it was his tenant that had a large boat pinning me in the corner. Now he's since got out of the boating business, and now we've got the owner of this property up here has a large boat on that same dock. He also has a whaler on this dock. He's also got 2 moorings out here at the foot of the canal. That's a lot of activity. He's got a lot going on down here for somebody that doesn't live on the canal. I'm sure there's been plenty of cases where he's maybe lent a hand to the maintenance or reconfiguration of these docks. To my knowledge, that's consideration. This guy here, Matter is the owner. She's got a tenant on this dock who lives way up here somewhere, and he frequently uses this boat. I'd like to see under oath people tell me that he's not paying anything for that.
You're out of line.
I will tell you this.
There'll be no disruptions.
I will tell you this. Mr. Iapini told me in no uncertain terms, I know it's hearsay, but maybe there's plenty of that going around. He told me in no uncertain terms for years, Matter had a small cottage industry renting out his 100-so feet of docks. So that was just told to me by Mr. Iapini in no uncertain terms. So my only point is, there is consideration of some kind floating around out there. Thank you.
Ms. Braga.
So I think this can risk devolving into, a back and forth that doesn't, my main concern really is that regardless of whether, I think it's concerning if people are, certainly if they're running there's a commercial element to it, but we have a number of floats that aren't fully registered or are registered in some capacity but not for what's actually there. Quite a few that really haven't been dealt with appropriately in any way. Even if we, and I certainly take, I haven't reviewed the paperwork, but if that's what we're being told, that there was a process that went through, a process was gone through to a certain extent for some of these floats, we still have the admission that the floats don't comport with what was even placed in those initial filings. So that's the part that concerns me, although I certainly, you know, I think it's worth having heard some information on what, you know, whose boats are there and what the situation is. But a bigger concern is when I look at this, I see lots of floats and not a lot of compliance or, you know, folks who've gone through the process. That's a part that's alarming to me.
Absolutely. Sir? State your name, please.
Yeah, I know. My name's Anthony Penticus. I'm the 5 candidates to try. Just a couple of things. Attorney Boyd dropped something off on you regarding my 2 dogs, here and here. And we went through the conservation about 6 years ago, and we got the final sign off. At the meeting, we asked, can we put them in now? They said, no, you need a final sign off. There's about 7 or 8 signatures on what was handed to you. And then after that, we asked, can we put our dogs in now? And they said, yes, you can. And that's why we proceeded. And I've hired Cape Island Engineering a while ago to get me in compliance. And also, I'm trying to do what the state wants me to do. And from some Chapter 91 FAQs, it clearly states, you know, someone in my situation who didn't know that you need authorization, and their goal is to bring people in to compliance with Chapter 91. You interested?
Yeah, you can, yeah, please.
Okay. It deals with why some people don't have licenses and right, yeah.
Thank you.
So, my dad had Chapter 91, the concrete seawall, I believe in 94, got a 99-year permit. And if we felt and were told you had to take the next 2 steps 6 years ago, we would have. We're not trying to pull a fast one, try to get away around from the law or anything like that. My dad always tried to do the right thing. It's still done us to always do the right thing. And where it's come to my attention, this has to be done, I'm doing the right thing. It's not anything underhandedly, and both sizes of those docks, 4 by 20, is that what was requested? We requested with conservation. And just one final note, yes, sometimes there's a whaler here, it's my friend. There's no fee, there's no, you do this for me, you can leave it there. And also, I am joint owner of the boat that goes there.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you
that
very much.
clarification. Is there anyone else who wants to speak in favor of the granting of this license? In favor?
In favor.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Mike Cacciadoria, and I'm the owner of this property right here. And I just wanted to make one point according to clarify something Attorney Hoyt just mentioned previously, that both Mr. Dundoulas' docks were grandfathered because they've been in them for over 10 years. And
Quick
also,
question, Mr. Cacciatorian, at the previous hearing, were you sworn in?
Yes,
to
I
speak? Thank you, I thought so. Go ahead.
and also he said Mr. Penticus floats were grandfathered in because they've been in for over 10 years. And as you just heard Mr. Penticus say that his floats have been in for 6 years. And also, we know that Mr. Dundoulas' floats haven't been in for 10 years because there've been, so far, 3 different series of floats that have been in here. So nothing he has been in for over 10 years, if the grandfather issue does come up.
I just want to note that I don't believe Attorney Hoyt, I think he specifically said that Mr. Penticus, it did that 10-year rule didn't apply to him. I think he was making a general comment, that's the way I heard it, about some of the others, and I think what he said was the other homeowners could speak to that piece, but thank you for
Okay, I
that.
didn't hear it that way, but
Thank
it's
you.
on.
Thank you for clarifying, yep.
Thank you.
I wasn't going to get up again, but I just want to address the 10-year rule. I don't disagree with what Attorney Hood says, is that your zoning bylaw does say that if someone has a structure in place without proper permits, it's conferred non-conforming status. But I'm not so sure that applies in this case, because the persons that will be claiming that don't own the land. Everybody's property line stops at the bulkhead, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts owns the land under the water, or if it's not the Commonwealth, it's the developer, because the subdivision plan for this particular canal, when the subdivision was subdivided and approved, it was actually land that was then dredged out to create this. But the point is that nobody on the canal owns beyond the bulkhead, and so I'm not sure that the 10-year rule would apply. And even if it did, you would still need a Chapter 91 license, which is basically a license from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that says you can occupy the waters of the Commonwealth. And so even if the floats, whatever configuration they were there, gained some status under zoning, they don't have Chapter 91 licenses unless they're shown in gold on this property. And so the point being here, and I think I kind of might have lost the way with all this information, is we have two major points, is that if one looks at the canal as far as what is there legally, there's plenty of room for this pier to be put in, and there's plenty of room for the people that want to come after us and ask this board for proper permits, which, as another side point I'd like to make, would contain terms and conditions so that somebody like me that goes to the registry of deeds can find them and know exactly where they stand, so that we don't have this kind of back and forth argument. But the other point that I want to make, and it's a very brief point, and I'll just read it like this. We have another exhibit that even if one were to look at everything that's actually there, licensed or not, there's still enough room. These boats were the ones that Mr. Verselli mentioned the last time. We call it our design boat. It's a 25-foot center console boat that's common to the Cape. If everyone had that kind of boat, there'd still be enough room. So we would respectfully ask the board to exercise its discretion and grant the permit.
On that point, and maybe Mr. Verselli would have to answer this, so if the boats on the diagram were all the size of those on the dock, how much maneuvering space is there between the boats? I can't tell the scale from here.
So I'll let Mr. Verselli do that.
Yes, thank you.
For purposes of compliance with the open meeting law, this is a small picture of what I just showed you.
Thank you. We'll pass it out. Thanks a lot. This is helpful.
Madam Chairman, to answer your question, these are 8.5-foot beam boats as a design boat. So you can see if this is an 8.5-foot beam, there's probably 6 feet on this side. There's probably 10 here. I also did a template just to see, you could maneuver, if you're a boater, you understand how to back out of a slip, maneuver your boat, and leave. And that can be done from any position. In fact, we even show the 2 licensed floats for Mr. Dundalis as on the license plan, assuming that he would have 2 boats since he had 2 licenses. In my experiences, this has always been
The one in front on that subject, if that was as big as your template, it's a little bit of tight squeeze if that middle boat was up a little too far.
This
Yeah.
one? Yeah. Well, this gap certainly will allow you to maneuver a boat out through that gap.
Could you do the same maneuver you did with your template boat with it against the bulkhead along the property line? Is it possible
Here?
to do that? Sure, either there or the other property, I don't care.
So if I come in and I know that someday I'm going to come back out,
No, I'm saying, let's say the pier isn't there.
Yeah, so if I'm trying to occupy a position like this, I have to back into that position, try to wedge myself in.
Turn your boat around. Can you back out from there?
If I tried to come in and had the boat like this, I would have to push off and then fend off the bulkhead, keeping in mind that there'd be another boat in the same position on this side. So,
But if you do that exact same maneuver that you're doing right now to your pier, you're going to have the exact same problem. Try to do it to your pier again. Do it to your pier. That maneuver that you just did, you're going to have to fend off that pier as you back out. In the exact same way you just said. There's no way of getting out. If you try to back out right now, where's your boat going? Into that pier.
As you back out like this, you get to a certain point where you can pivot on the float.
So you're gonna pivot that way.
Yes.
But you've got a bigger, if you have a bigger boat right underneath it,
Here?
that's what's touched it. Yeah.
Right, but you can back your boat to the center of the channel, play the wind, maneuver your boat, and get out.
I mean, I guess the thing is that it's a tight space no matter what. But I mean, I'm just speaking for me, and the way that, you know, I look at it is that, you know, you're kind of balancing two sort of arguments about fairness. One for folks who have lived here for a really long time and have kind of done things a certain way and have raised good points about, you know, it's not necessarily like anybody's trying to, you know, sneak through. Some folks haven't followed through with what they're supposed to do. But, you know, they're concerned about this becoming a less user-friendly area. But, you know, then I balance that with someone who's coming and jumping through all the hoops and doing all the things that they're asked to do to try to create a better usability for property that they own, maybe for less time than some of these other individuals, but they are obviously investing a lot of time, effort, money into trying to create something that's, you know, just easier sort of for them to use. And part of why the whole area is difficult is because we do have a lot of floats that aren't in compliance and maybe wouldn't be that size or be that many if the folks had gone through that process. So I guess that's what I hear, you know, I certainly hear both sides, and part of it is that we're just limited by the fact that this is a man-made channel that has no wiggle room. I mean, it's got hard boundaries.
Madam Chair.
Please.
I owned a Cal 25 sailboat. I had a 7 horsepower outboard on it. Pretty tough to maneuver a boat that big with a 7 horsepower motor. I moored in slips with much more congestion than this. What bothers me is that people aren't seeing, you know, we want to have access to water. And we really should respect our neighbors and everybody else that has legitimate waterfront rights to accommodate each other. Yeah, it's going to be tough, but I had people that fended off other boats to make sure that they didn't bang into them. That's the right thing to do. You know, tight conditions, fine, but I think we should be accommodating as many people as we can in reasonable docking configurations. And I'm just bothered by the fact that we have this territorial fight going on, in some type cases trying to create space for non-resident owners, when in fact we ought to be trying to accommodate each other and recognize that this is a doable configuration, but it is going to mean a change in how you handle your boat. And it does require proper seamanship and courtesy in terms of fending off to other people's boats. It can be done, and that's my point. I have been in more congested harbors than this, with a boat that's far less maneuverable from all the motorboats that you've been talking about, and managed just.
Doug.
Another point I'd like to add to Sam is, in most of these licenses that the selectmen have voted in the past, the wording is, the structure is authorized for the private, non-commercial use of home occupant and guests. That does not mean neighbors. That does not, it means home occupant and their immediate guests. The structure may not be used for commercial purposes, leased, rent, or otherwise let for compensation. If we didn't have these boats that were not by the property owners, I think we'd have a lot smaller problem. If we didn't have docks that were illegal or not by licenses, we'd have a lot smaller problem. On the other hand, I don't like this configuration of this dock in this area. It is not fitting with everything else that's happened there. I'd much be happier to approve the applicant to put 2 new docks along the bulkhead, all the other docks along the bulkhead, and ask the owners of the other docks to conform to the regulations. Is where I'd be much more leaning to go.
Point of order. It seems that you're making some kind of determination before you've taken all the public comment,
Right,
maybe those that are against.
It's discussion, but we're getting to the against.
Okay.
Is there anyone else who wants to speak in favor?
No.
Okay, is there anyone in the audience who wants to speak against? You, sir, in the back?
Good evening. Frank Gondoulas, 18 Cashman Drive. I had a couple of things here I wanted to bring up.
Were you previously sworn in the last hearing, sir?
I spoke at the last hearing, I don't know if I...
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we've been a residents here about 14 years. Presently, the board is reviewing a proposal to install a ramp and a floating dock in the Atlantic Canal abutting our home. Allowing this project will greatly impact us. Navigating in a narrow waterway will become extremely dangerous, and this dock up the center of the canal is not going to help. We have been a resident for, 14 years, homeowner in Falmouth 34 years. All neighbors park their boats adjacent to the bulkhead, using the area in front of their property for the desired boats, and like all of us, pay taxes on dockage property. The dockage proposed at the center of the canal will not be taxed, but will allow the parties involved to use a common area that interrupts taxpayers' use of their own property. Also, this will impact the value of our home because 60 feet of dockage, which we now use and pay, will become too dangerous to park our boats. Okay, we've also talked about the foot. The exaggeration of the width of the canal was not 78, it was 67. You've seen the pictures of the property, but I had this one other interesting letter from Cape and Islands Engineering. I'll be quick. This particular canal was created around 1971, the same time the lots and roads were created. The canal was created to provide access to navigable waters in the Commonwealth of all property owners with frontage along the canal. Identifying the actual intent can be difficult. However, based on the best available information, being the general design of the canal and the historic use, it can be argued that the intent was to have property owners with frontage on the canal install floats for berthing the boats parallel with the bulkheads, simply because this provides a clear channel for access. Aside from intent, this makes the most practical sense because it's the only reasonable way everyone along the canal could access the waterways. For example, if everyone was to propose the installation of a piling with ramps and floats projecting into the waterway, it would become unusable. Another way to look at the situation is seeing the intended use being similar to that of a road, a right-of-way for property owners to use and access. The use of the road and the waterway may not be exactly alike. However, they are similar enough to use that as an example. In this line of thinking, a proposal to have the pilings, a ramp, and a float installed in the middle of the waterway would be akin to having a private driveway and a parking area being proposed in the middle of a road. Such an idea would never be allowed or even contemplated on a public road. Similarly, with right-of-way access easements over land, one person with rights in the access easement may not use the way in a manner that would cause a burden or otherwise create a hardship for the other people to use the canal. The proposal by these two property owners to now change the manner of the use and install pilings, a ramp and a float in the middle of the canal will certainly have an impact to navigation and result in undue burden to the other property owners. Ultimately, approval of such a change and how the canal is used will most likely result in considerably hardship to all the property owners on the canal by way of diminished usability of the waterway and subsequent diminished property values. It does not seem logical or justifiable to allow two property owners to use a right-of-way in a manner that is not keeping with the historic use and with negativity affects the 8 other property owners.
Thank you.
And that's it. And just this one other thing. Selectman Jones took the time Sunday morning to come by, walk on the dock, look out at the situation. And I just wanted to thank him very much for taking the time and the due diligence for one of its citizens. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak against this application? Sir? Mr. Murphy?
Thank you very much. Kevin Murphy, Precinct 5. I'm familiar with this location. I'd like to say that this is a typical neighborhood dispute that the board has to deal with. and people are looking for their property rights. But I look to ask you, first of all, I'd like to thank you for looking into my question in regard to abutters and the 50-foot area. I do remember that coming up when I was a selectman at one point in time, and we refused it, and it was held. But if town council, in fact, says that's not the case, it would go to the DEP, that's fine as well. But I'd like to make a couple of comments. We're not talking about the other end of the specific channel. The two areas that there are potentially licensed docks are at the end. I kind of find it comical or coincidental that this particular property owner had a float in front of his property for many years, and it's in the file, a picture of that float. So it's don't do as I do, do as I say, now all of a sudden. Bottom line is that this was built as a bulkhead docks. Over the years, people stopped using ladders to enter onto their boats. They started using floating docks to be able to get access to their boats. Simple math will tell you that I have a 25-foot center console. It's 9.5 feet wide. So you've got 4 boats. Not to be exaggerated, we've got 40 feet of the 68. We're adding 3 6-foot docks right there, floating docks. An additional 18 feet. Now we're at 58 feet. You have 10 feet left. Start putting bumpers, which everybody does. You have a boat, you have an investment. You're now going to put something to keep that boat from hitting, whether it be the floating dock or the boat that might be next to you. So add another foot to every one of those boats. We'll come up with another 4 feet. We're now at 62 feet of the 67 feet. Common sense tells us that there's 3 feet left between here and here. That means 1.5 feet. I don't envy you tonight, okay? But there is a solution, and Mr. Jones brought up the solution. And the solution is, this was originally built as a bulkhead area. For the convenience of folks to use their boats, it was allowed over the years. When I was a kid, you went down the bulkhead. If you went to Wild Harbor, you'd see you don't have floating docks around the bulkhead there. You go down a ladder to get on your boat. But what's happened here is over the years, folks have been able to use for convenience sake the same thing. I wouldn't begrudge these folks, and nor do I think anyone should begrudge them from using a floating dock in front of their bulkhead to be able to access their boat. But the math doesn't work to be able to put 4 boats right here along this area with those floating docks. And I agree with you, Sam. If all things being equal, you're pulling into a marina and there's someone there, you do want them to help you fend off. But guess what? Someone is not always there. And back when I had my original boat, it was inconceivable when a kid who cut lawns bought. Now you can only think and imagine what it costs to get a boat. So the bottom line is that I think that this particular scenario is wrong, but there is a solution, and I ask that you ask them to go back to come up with a solution that benefits all. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Sir?
Just following directly on that point, I just want to explain that when I first became involved with this case, my first question to Patty Dundulis was, what's your objective? Is it to try to block them from having access to the water, or is it just to try to find a better configuration? And she said, it's to find a better configuration. I'm looking at an email I sent to Attorney Welbeck on June 20th, in which I said my clients are open to alternative designs that would allow boating access from your clients' properties. If your clients are interested in that conversation, let me know. And I'm not saying that Brian has said he rejected that conversation, but the point is that that's our objective here, is not to block water access, but to have a better configuration. I would also, Tony did a little math that I think is relevant. Just looking at what's there, okay? On Tony's dock, you got about 75 foot of his frontage has flown up. You look at the Dundulis' property, about 75% of their property has frontage. If you look at what's proposed by the applicants, the length of pier or boat that they're asking to have provided to them is 95+% of the length of their frontage. So they're proposing to put in a lot of boat in a configuration that doesn't work. I mean, if this thing was not a tiny boat, but a real boat, I think you can see that it just doesn't work here, even looking at the licensed location. But the overall point is, the neighborly thing to do of all of them is to sit down and try to find a way to have a configuration that's fair and that gives access to the water. That's accomplished if the board rejects this particular permit application and says, go back to the drawing board with your neighbors and figure out a better one and come back. There's no preventing them from coming back a month from now with an alternative configuration. One that was discussed with their neighbors before trying to push it through the permit process. So that is what we are requesting, is a denial of this particular application so that we can have the conversation that we've offered to have to find a configuration that works.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question of the attorney?
Oh, yes.
What I'm hoping to hear you say is, and the neighbors are willing to move forward, if it is rejected, to get their docks licensed, regulated, and following the regulations of the town. Because none of those are. Right now, none of those really fit the regulations because they're boats that don't belong there, and they're docks that are above the size of their regulations, and there are some docks that are not licensed. And so
I can say that, and in fact, I meant to say earlier that the Dundulis have been working to address the non-conformity or the difference between what's there. And at the end of the day, they're gonna only put in and use what's compliant. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sir, can you at least defend me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to speak?
Ma'am, you're not being recognized.
I'm sorry. I think to the extent I can
Thank you, counsel.
briefly add that.
Sir,
I'm told that
you're not recognized. There's someone
I'm done.
behind you that's recognized to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't
That's okay.
didn't realize you were talking to me. Okay.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Please.
Steve Bayless, again, owner of this property here. I just wanted to clarify, it sounds like the opponents of my plan trying to make it look like, we're pushing through a permit, whereas the goodness of their heart was working out great, and it wasn't. I would be pinned down here, but at least under the existing illegal configuration, I can barely nose in. But the neighbors who don't, or the people who occupy these docks who don't live there, they're instructed, or they take it upon themselves to take great pains to cut off any possible angle for this lot to use any part of this bulkhead. We're talking about measurements and the fine tuning of measurements. But what would be lost in my opponent's argument is there would be no way to access this bulkhead on this side because the dock is within a couple of feet of the bulkhead. On this side, the license structure is actually closer to my bulkhead than the illegal structure, but nonetheless, the fact that these large boats buffer out so far into the canal, it's next to impossible to make this turn and actually use your bulkhead because they've taken great pains to use every inch of their waterfront. And I think it's easy to say we're only using 75% or 75% of our waterfront, but they use it in such a fashion that there's great space in the middle here, but the docks are pushed right up to the terminal ends of their lots. And I thought I saw somewhere that you had to give some amount of feet between your dock and the neighbor's lot line. That's not the case down here. So I just wanted to make that clear that the goodness of their heart argument doesn't work well. I've tried it. It gets me nowhere. And it would get my co-applicant absolutely nowhere. And I do object to the phrase, pushing through a permit. I believe that's a proper process. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak against this permit? Is there anyone else who wants to speak in favor? Ma'am?
She's angry.
I have to excuse
You're not listening.
myself.
Sir, did you want to speak? Okay, thank you.
My name is Mark Green, I'm a Falmouth resident. Just a couple comments I'd like to observe on. First of all, the issue of safety. This is not a superhighway. This is somebody coming into a slip. You're coming in at 2 miles an hour, often have somebody at the bow to fend off. There's no issue with ramming into a boat. If you have 2 feet of clearance, you've got plenty of room. The second thing I'd like to comment is I don't see why all of these guys can't put a 3-foot wide float in front of their property. There'd be plenty of room for everybody, and these big floats are barging out into the canal, using up space, which I don't know if the term is not theirs, but anyhow, using up space that could easily be used by somebody else. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, final comment. Ma'am, did you want to speak? Final comment?
I do. And my apologies to you. First of all, my father wouldn't do anything that wasn't illegal. And I'm having a hard time with that because he just passed away. And he was a lieutenant in the Navy, and I learned everything from him. And most of all, I am going to turn my head.
You
So,
have to speak
I
to,
can't?
you have to speak to me,
Okay,
ma'am. That's the
assumption,
process.
okay, assumption kills the possibility of knowing the truth. So with that being said, some things were said today that are not true. And one, our dogs have been in there for 30 years. We did not buy that house. My father bought the land and built it from the ground up for my family. So from my Zodiac boat that he got me for my sweet 16th birthday, to my brother-in-laws, my sisters, my nephews, that's my blood. My blood is on these docks right here. So it's not from some guy over yonder. There's a gentleman that is our neighbor across the street, and we also in the winter share our Florida space with him. He's not a stranger, okay? And he works with my nephew. So when something is said that is not true, it really gets me because I spent my last 20 years in Hollywood. So I get the stories, and I'm a fighter, but I'm also one with facts. So if I can just finish, these are our docks, this has been in, whatever the grandfather thing is, if you want, we can cut it down, I'm gonna save the pieces, but this is the real deal, and like I said, you know, assumption just totally kills the possibility of knowing the truth, and I guess when we have cookouts, we can't have people park in our driveway anymore, right? Do we own that? You know?
Thank you for your comments. Thank you. Mr. Verselli, last comment?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. A lot of thought went into this configuration. We didn't just go at this willy-nilly. There's other regulations. There's the Department of Natural Resources, Division of Marine Fisheries, Conservation. They all have rules that are subject to, that were subject to their scrutiny. And one of them, specifically the Conservation Commission, has water depth minimums on the floats, regardless of whether it's a man-made canal or a naturally occurring waterway. Floating docks are supposed to have at least 3 feet of water from the buoyancy to the bottom. That's why we picked this. That mandates, that meets that requirement for environmental separation from the buoyancy to the water. Even if we were to contemplate putting an alongside float in front of each of these, the depth of water at the bulkhead is not sufficient to meet the required conservation regulation, which I think is a more important consideration than some potential inconvenience of accessing your boat. And finally, I'd like to talk about the dimensions of the channel in just a very general way. I'm not going to count up how many feet. I'm going to have you just look at an illustration of a boat that is common, 26-foot center console, 8.5 to 9-foot beam. There was a comment earlier that all of these floats would be 6 foot wide. They're not. We're 4. Mr. Penticus is a 4. And when you do the math in a way that you want the statistic to meet your consideration, you can magnify what you want to bring
Saying
out.
you have more than 1.5 feet on either
Yes,
side? When you maneuver,
absolutely.
the boats are
You
as big
can-
as the one on the dock?
Graphically see it. That's why we did this. It's sufficient. And I think that is demonstrated by that exhibit.
Thank you.
Move to close the hearing.
Second?
All those in favor of closing the hearing?
Aye.
Okay. Doug, you want to start off?
This is a case where I think we're going to need to have some findings, because I think our decision is going to be then reviewed later, no matter what decision we make.
I agree.
I guess the first finding, if this is a exceptional case because it is a man-made canal, it is not a natural occurring water body, and I believe under those circumstances, the Conservation Commission very well might look at things a little differently. I know that their regulation on the 3 feet underneath a dock is to protect eelgrass. My quick look at this is not a place that we're going to be protecting eelgrass ever. It just is not a healthy enough body of water that we are really worried about the natural resource, unfortunately. And another finding is that I think we can make a finding that there are a large number of docks in this canal. Some have licenses. Some we have not been able to find evidence of licenses, and some docks are different size than the licenses that are existing.
And some are in the process of licensing one way or another.
Another finding is that there are more boats being stored here than are property owner boats.
Just starting there, could we have is there agreement or a second on those findings to date?
Oh, I agree.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
I might mention, just subject to findings, it's often a condition of the Conservation Commission that only a certain number of boats be moored at a dock. And I think we're looking at a case where that condition has not been applied to the other properties. And I'm not sure when it comes to fairness how we sort of sort that out. And since this isn't really a hearing about the use of those other bulkhead areas, but really this particular, but it's a factor in my mind.
Ms. Brock, did you want to pick up?
I'm just thinking what else we can find as particular facts for this.
I mean, I guess it is another finding that there is not a general agreement that this pier is welcomed by the neighborhood. We do not have a solution that is agreeable to one way or the other to the entire neighborhood. So we are, that is a finding.
I guess another finding would be that we've, I don't know how we would word this, but we've heard sort of contradictory evidence on, depending on how these docks and bumpers are configured, that there's somewhere between 1.5 feet to a lot more than that in terms of maneuverability in regards to these particular, the proposal of the size of these boats.
I think that can be a finding is no matter what configuration, it will be a tight fit for boats to get in and out.
With the number of boats that are there currently and using these boats.
And the size of the floats?
I'm not sure. I mean, even if we have one boat at the Dumbo, this is one boat at the Patinicus and one each at these, that's going to be 4 boats in a tight area. No matter what else is out there, it's still tight.
in your voting experience. In mine, it's not. Not for mooring boat.
Is there a second on that finding?
I'll withdraw it if it's not available.
You withdraw, all right, fine. Town council, is there any other findings we need to make before we move toward a decision?
Well, your conclusion, as I pointed out to you in the memorandum, has to be on a review and the impact of the proposal on the aquatic resources. It's what the judgment of the board should be guided by what in its judgment is desirable to protect and conserve the shellfish, which I don't think is an issue, and other aquatic resources of the town. And as I mentioned to you in an email, I think aquatic resources would include navigation. So if you have a navigation issue, you might consider it.
So I think we should make two other findings, however we decide to word it, but one in regards to shellfish, because that is one of the considerations, and then again, as town council is noting, one in regards to navigation, however we, so if the consensus is that this particular float doesn't pose any kind of specific impact to shellfish, which I think we've somewhat agreed upon, or maybe we haven't, but.
We've not had any testimony.
We haven't had any testimony.
To that effect, beyond my saying when I was over there, I can't believe shellfish are an issue here because they're not growing anyway, but that is
And I don't-
my
did we-
professional opinion.
Well-
We don't have a report from the shellfish board, and they did not do a study on it, I don't believe.
They did not, but the fact that the Conservation Commission granted this means that they looked at it and decided it was not an issue for this particular permit.
And for that configuration.
And that configuration is proposed.
So the finding that the proposal does not pose a risk to aquatic resources that Ms. Braga moved, is there a second?
Shellfish issue.
I think, I just want to say shellfish, because then I think
Sure.
we have to break that down to shellfish and then navigation, which
Right,
is the
right.
other component, so.
Well, I'll second that as a finding.
So all those in favor of that finding?
Aye.
Okay.
And then as to navigation. I think it's fair to say that regardless of configuration and number of boats, that this, well, this goes back to what Doug was trying to say, that it's a challenging, navigation is challenging. I don't think we don't have to say it's impossible, but it's challenging in this canal.
Is there a second on that finding?
Sure, second.
For discussion, Madam Chair?
Please.
Just, I don't know if it's helpful, but perhaps to describe the existing conditions, if you want to, if the board wants to have
Yes.
one finding for existing conditions and the difficulty of navigation, and then
Good suggestion.
have that as a baseline to address what the proposal does to the existing conditions.
My only concern about that is, does that validate the existing conditions as being approved, legal? Where I'm concerned is I think the existing conditions are challenging in a way that shouldn't be, because we're having boats that are, there's one boat in particular that's really way too big for this canal, that is not owned by a property owner. It is on a dock that is a fairly large dock, bigger than the other ones that have been licensed. And that's adding to the challenge.
That's a finding,
Yeah.
in my mind. The way you just stated it is a finding.
So that's a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Peter, could I just ask, Peter, are you taking notes as well on this? Okay,
Doing
so
my
I'll let
best.
you word that one.
Jennifer, too.
Great, yeah.
And I am a little concerned about how far it is a bizarre thing, because it is not a body of water that we normally deal with. How far can you go out from your property into is this owned by the Commonwealth, is this owned by the developer? It certainly is not owned by any of these property owners. None of these property owners own any bit of this water.
Well, I think that gets to the navigation and the challenges that have been expressed in the testimony that we've heard.
Well, I guess even apart from the navigation, just how far out can you put the structure away from
A
your
dock.
property?
A dock or float.
I guess as far out as you get a permit.
Right.
For, which is,
Right.
I mean, I think,
And
again.
the regulations
Right.
about you can only go 25% across.
Mhm.
In a canal like this, it's
Doesn't have the
very
same-
different, partly because this is extending out past the property lines of 2 other houses. And in a way that I'm troubled by, that these properties have their this is right out in front of their houses. And I'm not sure, according to what Mr. Duffy said, whether that can even be entering into our discussion, because it's just the
Nobody
dock is affecting the aquatic resources.
Well, either way, in terms of the view, you're gonna be looking across the canal at other boats anyway.
I just, in terms of just our findings, you know, just to, it looks like we have about 7 so far, so.
Would it be a finding that the proposed dock would present difficult but not impossible navigation?
If we preface that with the current structures in, you know, the current floats, with the floats current, you know, configured as they currently are, that are in existence,
but not necessarily
in
permitted.
permanent or in compliance, that it would pose.
Floats and boats, perhaps?
Yeah.
To Doug's
Floats
point.
and boats, to Doug's point.
I would second that. I think that is a good finding.
All those in favor?
Aye.
It seems like we've covered the basis on findings. Is there anyone who wants to suggest a position for the board to consider?
Well, I would recommend that we grant the permit.
Is there a second on granting the permit?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of granting the permit? Aye.
I'm opposed.
Right.
So, and it failed.
Thank you, everyone.
So I just want to be clear so that folks, that they understand.
It failed.
Thank you very much
Oh,
for your
I'm
time.
sorry.
Yeah.
It failed, yeah, I'm sorry. So it was 3-1, it failed.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
No, that's okay, that's right.
Yeah, all right, it's like,
Budget policy.
I think we're gonna take
Oh, yes.
on the water outfitters, will come up.
We did try to take you early, but.
No, really, come away. I was told 7:50.
I know.
You wouldn't understand about these water issues.
Yeah.
I didn't want to throw my head in that ring. Chris
So would you
Meegan,
introduce yourself?
Chris Meegan, the owner of On the Water Media Group, and you have a task ahead of you with that. I would just, before I jump into mine, and I know the hearing's closed, but I would just add to what you said, Mr. Patterson, is that one of the biggest struggles that we have at our company and anyone that works around the water is access to the water. Whether or not it's a boat getting to the water, whether or not it's a fisherman trying to get to a beach that's closed because the chains are up at 9 o'clock at night and they can't park in the lot. Access is a big issue to all fishermen. And especially at this time of year, most fishermen do their fishing after hours just because the water is so warm out there. But as I said, I'm not going to throw my hat in that ring, and I'll stick to the task. So there seemed to be a question as to what we were trying to achieve. When I was a chairman of the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce, what we tried to do was work with different small businesses. With us, the Business After Hours always had a nonprofit partnered with a for-profit, whether it was the Woodbriar, whichever business after hours they would have. And so in a small sense, that's kind of what we try to do. We have a business now that we're trying to do with the On the Water Outfitters. It's a small business out front. We're not on Main Street. Very difficult with no sidewalks to try to get anyone in there. And so what we did is we looked at some of the partners on the Cape and over in the Vineyard and tried to partner with them for just an open house. This is sampling, and I think most of the times these are 3 ounces. I think it's 3 ounces in the last for a sampling.
Neither the company that comes in nor us want any issues with, over-serving. We're trying to get folks to come in, see their product, see our product, and have an open house for certain customers that we're trying to introduce our outfitters to that way. Some of the folks we partner with, Bad Martha Brewery, I think is going to be coming into East Falmouth over where Oysters 2, I believe is where it is. Cisco Brewery's another one we're looking to. Shoal Hope Cider, Cape Cod Beer, Cape Cod Winery, which is just down the street from us. They bought that piece of property that was looked at as a 40B, I think, for a little while. And I think they've done a great job on that corner. That's something we wanted to invite down. And the only reason that one of the staff said, why don't we just apply for it, is because we didn't know if that was easier going every month here and saying, hey, we want to have a one-day liquor license with this. So I made the suggestion not to tie up the board, to just put down what you had in mind. If it's too much, we can certainly cut back on it. But these are from 5 to 7 o'clock. We had the one on the 30th. Probably 25 to 30 people come through. And it's, I just say that come through and do a sampling. You might have another 20 folks that are just kind of coming in the store. But that was the nature behind what we were thinking.
Questions, Doug?
When you say sampling, is it a free sample or is it sold?
It's a free sampling.
Which in some ways may, if that's what you want to do, I'm not sure if you need a special license for distributing free samples.
We had that question ourselves, but I'd rather kind of make sure we do it and then have someone like you say that, but it's always a free sampling that way.
In some ways that changes the
point of what we were concerned with.
Is that if you're, I like the idea of bringing in local establishments to give a chance to share your space for them to be able to test out what the different places are doing. And that takes care of the concern I have about this.
So I don't think you need our permission. It's been interesting to discuss this.
I'm not sure about that, so I think it's safe for us to go ahead and do it.
So I'm going to move approval then, just in case, just to be safe, for the dates that you've requested, that I know that you gave us a list of.
And that'll be worst case scenario. I suspect that it'll be, I should put out the most, and then we'll actually probably be a little bit less than that. But I'd hate to put out less than that and have it more, and then have it be an issue.
No, I think, I'm sorry.
Is it always going to be the third? I mean, is there a day we can count on it being?
I wouldn't say necessarily what they're, I would say that the manager's trying to do is wrap it around, like, at Thanksgiving, it may be that Friday afterwards where you have the open house and such. So we're gonna look for the third week that way, but yeah, I would see that it would probably be around there. And strictly just trying to look at some of the partners that I think make sense. J.R. Brody's is gonna come, hopefully, and do a sampling as well with the food. That's free as well on that. And just, to me, I live a half mile from where I built that office. It was important for me to do it in T-Ticket. That's kind of where home was, where I raised my 4 kids. And I think it's a part of town that could use that type of influence, if you will.
Absolutely. Is there a second?
I think you're doing Thursdays, though, right?
It is. I think for the most part it is Thursdays. I don't know the exact dates looking on this, but yes.
But just if you're going to do that, you then have to stick with those dates.
Well, I can tell you it's not going to be on Thanksgiving. I want to say the day after.
Right. All those in favor?
Well, before we go, though, I think it's important that you limit the amount of alcohol that you're giving away.
Oh, it's very much limited. I can tell you right now that that if you have Bad Martha's that way, they usually have, put it this way, I can tell you it's less than 1 beer. If you have 4 samples at 3 ounces each, I think you're at 1 beer, 1 12-ounce beer. And for the most part, folks will come through, try 2, maybe 3, and then they'll kind of move.
I understand. It's just that the penalty for serving the minors, intoxicating somebody, very stiff.
I own that facility. As I said, I live in a half mile from that. I've lived here 30 years now. And so I built that with my hands, with my crew from the ground up. And I'm not going to jeopardize it on being foolish.
In that case, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're up to the discussion of the fiscal year 2020 budget policy. Thanks for waiting, appreciate it.
Good evening. Received a copy of the budget policy in the packet. Every year I come before you after meeting with the town manager to give a requested budget policy. It really guides us when we put the 2020 budget together. And this year, I can just highlight some of the changes. Usually it doesn't really change that much, but this year there are a couple changes that that Julian's recommending for a meeting. So in the revenue policy, under local estimated receipts, we are going to look at an increase in allocation of estimated receipts. It will be consistent with the town's overall fiscal policy of conservative revenue estimates. And this circumstance will permit the town to fund additional public safety positions in the operating budget. So really what we're looking at, I mean, and it's a budget policy and it's more, big picture, if you will, but we are really going to look at some public safety positions and see what we can fund, see what we can fit in 2.5, but, probably take some estimated receipts.
So more police and fire for Falmouth.
We're looking at that, yes. In the state revenues, I just wanted to point out that we do continue to monitor potential new revenues from the seasonal lodging taxes. That was put back to the legislature, but for now, we'll just level fund our state aid. The other change that I just want to point out is that we've done pretty well, and as you know, we did achieve the AAA bond rating from Standard & Poor's last spring. And so a big part of that bond rating is they do look at our reserves. And so our reserves are healthy right now. So our stabilization through the Board of Selectmen's policy, they're just funding the stabilization account and about $440,000 every year. And so we've really reached that benchmark right now. And so what we're requesting is that we're still going to fund our reserves. We're going to funnel some of that money, redistribute it to our other post-employment benefit account. That comes up at town meeting a lot. We do have a $117 million liability. We know that it's difficult. It really is just a number, but other towns do fund it. We've been funding it at about $100,000 every year, so we want to fund it at $500,000. Now that can change from year to year, but that does look favorably on our reserves, especially when we're looking at the rating agencies. And we will be going out again to borrow probably in November because we have the large senior center project and we also have the athletic field. So we really want to be mindful of that bond rating to get a good interest rate on what we're going to be borrowing in the future.
Makes sense.
Any questions?
No?
Just a quick comment, I ran this by Julian ahead of time, but I feel like this is focused strictly on getting that bond rating and doesn't recognize the fact that we're trying to maintain and enhance the town's quality of life. So I would like to just suggest that in the second paragraph on the very first page, and it says the fiscal 2020 budget policy is intended to establish guidelines to ensure the strong fiscal health of the town of Falmouth as we continue to strengthen and manage the management practices in order to move toward meeting the town's financial goals, and then add to that and maintain and enhance the town's quality of life, which you've already alluded to in terms of improving public safety. And that's because I think that needs to be part of our goal, is to make sure that we're looking toward that continuous quality improvement.
I mean, if the board so chooses.
So I think that that's a fair sort of addition, because I think the thing that we've heard, I think the town manager has heard it, which is why you just raised the issue about sort of public safety, looking at that, is that, some folks, they look at that idea of, a AAA bond rating is an enormous achievement and it bears fruit for the town because it makes us, able to, borrow at less cost for the town and all of that. But, I think folks want to see that balance with still maintaining the level of services and, that it doesn't mean just having a status quo, but sometimes increasing them as our population and needs change. So I think that's it strikes a nice balance to recognize the importance of both those things. And then,
The phrase I was wondering, Sam, what was your last phrase? As opposed to quality of life, I want to talk about maintaining and enhancing services.
Well, to me, that's wrapped up in the quality of life. I mean, I don't care. You want to change it to something?
Yeah, I think services makes it more specific to the things that quality of life is kind of a general, more, it's that all-encompassing, but we kind of really specifically deal with kind of services. The budget kind of looks at services and
For what purpose?
Right, for the quality of life, but I think if we're...
That's my point.
Yeah.
I mean, the services are there to support the quality of life that we enjoy here.
It's more general.
So does this, is the word services in there?
No.
Can you just
I mean,
enhance?
again, it is in the next paragraph, so maybe we don't need it, because we do talk about the municipal services later on about. But where I wouldn't mind is maybe the next one is not just maintaining, but enhancing.
Well, I said that.
I mean,
He's saying
I
in
said
the
that.
area, he's talking about when we then specifically speak to services.
I got you.
You would also like the word enhancing, is that
sure.
correct?
So where would that be in the third paragraph? You want enhance?
maybe it's the very last paragraph.
I thought I used it at one point.
Could continue to support maintaining basic service levels in our community. And I guess I'd like to have a higher goal that we're maintaining, if not enhancing.
And enhancing basic services?
Sounds like we're gonna need more money.
That's actually what Jennifer's saying, is that we are going to be looking for more money, that we're going to look at the local receipts and seeing if, is there some more money to get increased services.
Right, can I just make one, I just wanted to, you know, when we do look at this and we put the budget policy together, it does reference the strategic plan, which a lot of you are discussing, because I sat through your strategic planning session, and you have a lot of that in the strategic plan. We can put it in here as well, that's fine, but I do want to let you know that it didn't go unrecognized of what the selectmen's overall goal and plan is, and your vision for the community, and that's why we reference that.
Good point, Ms. Broderick.
I was just gonna say, maybe it's just the word basic. If you just took the word basic out, maintaining service levels in our community, or.
Maintaining and enhancing service levels in our
Yeah.
community.
I guess I would prefer that.
What paragraph, Dan, I'm sorry.
It's the very end
fourth
of page
paragraph,
one, last
the last
sentence.
part of that
Page
sentence.
one.
So
Last line.
Oh, okay,
Doug is
sure.
saying maintaining and enhancing basic service
Oh,
levels.
So
sure.
we get rid of basic.
Okay.
Or get rid of the word basic.
So
Yep,
maintaining
okay.
and enhancing service levels in our community.
Okay.
There's a lot of enhancement going on in this, in this page here.
It's an aspiration.
No, I think, we laugh, but I think it really speaks to something that I know we all hear all the times from folks, which is, it's not just having that fiscal health, but they want to sort of see what does that do for folks,
Yeah,
in
we're
the
striving
community.
for it.
Yep.
And certainly what we heard at the Learning Center
Yes.
meeting we had was, and we're actually willing to pay for it.
Right.
It's like, we heard it from a lot of people,
Was it-
I'm not sure that everybody in town wants to, but they're
Yeah.
saying, we are acknowledged that our tax rate is low compared to a lot of people on the Cape, and that we think there's some new services that need to be done, they're willing to step up.
And then just,
Anything else? Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, on the other piece, it's not just looking for additional revenues, but it's really looking at the revenues that we have. You're calculating them slightly different. You're being a little bit, you're still being conservative, but you're acknowledging that the revenues have been a bit higher than we've been, so each year it's been a little bit higher.
I am, and I do want to point out that last year, when we came before you, we did put some more additional, we wanted to funnel additional monies to the school department. And so really, when we look at the budget policy, because it's so far in advance, part of it is what we know we're going to do, we want to let you know now.
Right.
Because a lot changes when we put the budget together and it goes to the finance committee and it's fluid. But we need to look at it holistically when the departments give us their requests. We have an idea what the requests may be, but sometimes we don't. And we need to sit down and have those meetings with the department heads and ask those questions. And then really put that puzzle together. And by looking at the budget this way, it gives us the opportunity to do that, and we will be, looking at all that when we put the budget together. So there's some unknowns, and then, we'll come back to you in January and give a budget presentation, and you can look at it then too as
I
well.
think the focus is important for folks to know, because last year we focused maybe more on schools, this year we're focusing more on public safety.
Right.
So I think that makes sense.
Madam Chair, we can
Please.
certainly work with the suggestions made.
I took,
Thank you.
have all the notes here.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. I want to take out of order number 6. It's kind of late enough. It's something quick. We have a request for a sign variance for off-premise promotional banners, Cape Cod Marathon, Falmouth Track Club.
Pardon me, Madam Chair, I don't think we had a vote on that.
With those changes?
With those changes.
Oh, sure. So motion, and is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of those changes?
Aye. Thank you.
Policy. Great,
Just want to make sure.
The policy is edited.
exactly. Okay. Cape Cod Marathon, Falmouth Track Club. Anyone here on the
Yes,
thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Jack Farian. I am the new race director for the Cape Cod Marathon weekend. And I'm looking to make a number of changes to the race, make it better for the community, better for the runners, give us more exposure. So one of the things I want to do that we've never done is to hang pole banners along Main Street. I can show you, I have a sample of what it is.
Please.
So you can see it. It's simple, it's straightforward. Made up by the Historic Commission. Initially it said welcome to Falmouth at the top, and the Historic Commission likes the word historic. And asked if I would mind substituting that. And I said, no, I don't mind that at all. I think it actually is better having Historic Falmouth there. So once I did that, they said yes, we approve it. When do you want to put up the pole banners? And I said, well, probably the week before the race. And they said, well, why don't you do it for the whole month? They would like us to do it for that.
That's after you agreed to the word historic.
Yes.
You could have asked them for anything at that point.
Yes. Coincidence.
Right.
So in the letter that you have there, it says, I believe, to put the pole banners up, and about 20 of them on both sides of Main Street. On poles, I would put them up on poles that aren't already going to be slated for the scarecrows that go up.
That was going to be my question.
That time of year. So it would be, it really doesn't matter to me which poles they're on. If there are other things that have to be on the line posts, I mean, they've been doing those for years. I don't want to stop that at all. I want to add a little to it, a little festivity to the town for the race, get more exposure for us. When the runners come into town, I've seen these at a lot of races, and it just adds a lot to the experience for everybody that comes into town. The businesses that I've talked to along Main Street, I've shown not all of them yet this, but when they see it, they're totally in favor of it. They're looking forward to seeing these along Main Street. I know the road race is a little bit jealous that they didn't do this because they've seen what we're doing. So they may come after you next year with an idea like this. So what I'm doing is asking your permission to hang these pole banners. In the letter that you have, it does say 10 days. I would prefer to do it before that, but it's up to you on the board to make that decision.
Thank you. Thoughts?
Madam Chair, could I ask for
Please.
clarification? Are we hearing that the Historical Commission was asked to review and approve this?
It was approved administratively according to the letter.
Yes. Corey and Ed in the Historic Commission, I met with them. I was under the understanding that I would need them to approve this.
You would need the Historical Commission to approve downtown banners?
Yes.
Who gave you that information?
I don't remember who that was.
One reason I raised it, Madam Chair, is the first time I've heard that suggested. Perhaps properly serve the board, we want to make sure that that is, well, while I certainly don't object to the input presented, I want to make sure that you're properly guided. There may be other commissions that may want to claim that they want to start to review banners as well. So I just want to be cautious and not taking the board in that direction.
Well, I'm fairly confident that it's our decision to make.
There's no doubt that it's your decision.
Yeah, I mean, if you got the input from the Historic Commission and you didn't need it, well, then you just did some extra work and you got yourself in the good graces of the Historic Commission if you ever need to have that. But I just want to understand, do we have the mechanisms for these to be, this, in other words, I'm assuming this is the right shape, size to fit, all of that was done ahead of time to fit however it would attach to the poles?
Yeah, what I did is I had a smaller version of this that I sort of put up against the poles, and I had a few people looking at it also, and that was too small. And so we took a different sign that was there that happened to be this size, and we put it up and we said, oh, that's the right size, so that cars would be able to see it when they're going by, people walking on the sidewalk, this would be the right size. Along with these banners, I'm purchasing the brackets that are needed to put them on the posts, so we'll have all of that. DPW has agreed to put them up, and get the dates to put them up. and I'll supply all the equipment to do that.
And it'll be attached so that they can come off and on?
Yes.
So, yeah, I guess I just want to make sure the brackets, and I see that Mr. McCartney's here, so as long as we understand the brackets aren't gonna, and I would expect that they would, but damage, you know, the posts or be too difficult to put up, and I mean, it sounds like you've done your homework on this.
When the
so.
brackets go up, there's rubber pieces that go on the bracket that would be against the post to prevent any damage to the post.
You said that other people have done this on Main Street?
No, not for these.
I mean, similar signs.
There are other signs on Main Street.
Okay.
I think.
So essentially this conforms to the way that other signs are being hung along the street there.
Well, I have different brackets that these.
Yeah, I know.
But
Could we just hear from, I don't know if you feel comfortable speaking to it, Peter, but is this something that you feel is doable? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it doesn't look like the type of, I think the signs I've seen are a little bit different that, you know, when I've seen them for events on Main Street. I just want to make sure that we're hearing from DPW as to their input on.
Yeah, actually, we did a couple months ago, they actually came in and proposed the signs to us, and we got to the point of going for the different approvals for the Board of Selectmen to have the signs up. But as far as mounting it to the actual pole, how it gets mounted, I don't know if it gets mounted with the radiator clamps or how that gets actually the bands that go around.
The bands.
Yeah. So I think that's just something, because those poles are cast iron, they're cast iron poles, so we wouldn't be drilling into them with.
No drilling, no damage to the poles at all.
Yeah, so I think that's just some of the logistics we'll have to work out on that.
Okay, and they seem like the poles are high enough that if those are on there, they're not anywhere near cars or anything like that, right?
And I think we have, there has to be a minimum of 7 feet up.
That's what I'm
With
asking.
our signs, we do 7 feet from the ground up.
Okay.
Yeah, and these.
So
And the poles are, how tall are the poles?
those poles are probably 12 to 14.
And these are 3 feet long.
Great.
One more question, just, the attachment, is that a plastic band that you're using to attach it to the pole itself?
No, it's a metal
band?
With rubber, you're saying a rubber?
The rubber is on, there's a bracket that goes on the post that holds the two poles. There's a pole in here and there's a pole in the bottom, so it's not flapping around. And so the pole would be over here. I have a picture of how it looks on the pole, if you want to see it.
You know, I have it in here, we're just
So-
wondering about this, I think we're just wondering about sort of
The attachment.
the attachment and then the size
Can
and
you walk
scale.
under it?
Right, can you walk
You can walk
under it, how far out?
You can walk under it. LeBron
Oh, I
may
guess.
not be able to, but you can walk under it. The two brackets, the two black pieces that are on the post, there's rubber behind those, so between the bracket and the post, there's rubber, so the metal bracket will be right against the pole. If we need to put a band of rubber around the pole,
You can work that out with
for the
DPW.
band, we can do that.
Mr. Johnson,
I can
stop.
supply that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if, how that size compares to anything else that we have currently or have had on Main Street, and how it relates to the size of the flags, for example. It just, I'm trying to visualize the aesthetic impact, and obviously, we're looking for something prominent for people to see, so I understand the desire to have something big. I guess the question is, how big is too big?
I'm not sure about, well, I am sure about Main Street, but I've seen these sizes of banners on streets where I've gone to marathons before. This size is the typical size for the banners that are put up there, and it does give it a real nice festive look along the street when you look down the street and you see them, and they don't look like they're overwhelming the posts at all.
Madam Chair, if I could.
Please.
Were the posts that they were being attached to similar in height to ours? Do you know?
I expect they were. They were, as I was looking at them, the bottom of the banner is above my head, but probably about this high. I'm about 6'5", so.
Me too.
Yeah. So we would be fine walking under these. they were high enough so that it isn't going to interfere with, you know, people walking underneath them.
Or line of sight.
Or line of sight.
Okay, please.
Can I add something?
Yes, thank you.
Jeremiah Pearson, Parks and Rec. The wreaths we put up in around Christmas time are probably even bigger than that, so.
That's helpful.
Thank you. That's what we're just, we were looking for.
No problem.
Madam Chair, can I have
Please.
one follow-up?
Yeah.
If I might ask Peter, does Public Works install any other banners in town?
I believe with the flags, maybe we work with the flags, but not the banners like these.
Mostly the Veterans Group, I think.
It's the
installs
veterans group that
flags.
does with the flags,
I
yeah.
understand.
And I believe this is in October, so there might be some coordination with, you know,
Christmas by the sea.
Veterans Day. Yeah.
Right.
The reason I bring it up, Madam Chair, is just, I want to make sure the board is aware of the potential precedent we're setting. We're creating another functional responsibility, which I applaud, but it's for the Department of Public Works. And we also need to recognize that this is not our only commercial district in the town of Falmouth. So we need to be prepared, potentially, for requests to install banners in Woods Hole by Public Works. I'm not encouraging it, but I'm just saying, you know, the reality, I've been in this business long enough to understand that.
We'll have a policy soon.
Yeah, we need to have a policy, we need to have a new and expanded role for Public Works. You know, and there are other areas, T-Ticket, for instance, and merchants there that we may get a request, and I want to be respectful for that on behalf of the board going forward. So I just wanted to put that on the table. Thank you for hearing me out.
We'll see how we may see how these look, and after that say, we need a policy, or we're saying we don't need a policy because we're never going to do it again.
Well, I think we should also know what the cost is to the town. How much labor is going to be involved in putting them up on part of DPW. So in the future, we might want to charge a fee for such a service.
Peter, do you have any kind of thought on that?
Yeah, you know, when they put the wreaths up, they use the bucket trucks and they use the ladders, and so it can be time consuming. In that October timeframe, it can be time consuming.
And
So-
bucket truck type traffic, that's a whole nother. Megan?
But, I mean, bearing all of that in mind, I would say this. We are always looking to extend our shoulder season in this town for our merchants. This is not an event that's taking place in August when the last thing we need is like another thing to draw people to Main Street because it's already a hot spot, or draw people to town. You know, I can probably guarantee that a lot of the restaurants and the hotels are happy to have some of the folks come and be here for that weekend as we're getting close to kind of that really quieter time. So, you know, again, I think Julian raises a good point. You know, anytime we make a decision like this, it's something new, but it's not locking us into buying into this as forever. And we may have to come up with a policy around it, but it would be nice to maybe see what this looks like, hear back from DPW as to whether or not this was you know, if these brackets are a pain and this is way too time consuming and we hear from them, this isn't something we have time to do. This is kind of a trial run, and that's, you know, we'll just kind of judge it from there.
The other reason I support it is that the marathon is a troubling time a little bit between that weekend for residents who are not involved in it. And so I also see it as a little bit of a public service announcement saying, hey, heads up, the marathon's happening, which is the reason why I prefer the dates you originally requested. So if it's the 17th to the 27th, it's just up for 10 days ahead of time, gives people plenty of warning, and I see it as being helpful that way. And I don't think it needs to be up much more than that as a really getting awareness out there. So I think having it up there for a full month, if we end up that we're wrong, it was a bad idea. It's a long time with a bad idea. But if it's just for the 10 days that they requested, I feel a little more comfortable with that.
Then maybe I would, if we're thinking of, oh, sorry, Peter?
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just had one more. I might have missed. How many flags were they actually talking about?
About 20.
20?
Yeah, I think we want to think about limiting the number of flags, just because of the extent of work that DPW is going to have to contribute.
I guess I would, if we're gonna limit it to a lesser period than the whole month of October, I'd rather shift it and do it sort of leading up to, because I think the goal is when people come in for this event, it's kind of an exciting thing to see your event sort of recognize, you know, that, so maybe the 10-day, whatever, if we want to do a 10-day period, you know, the sorry, 27th and 28th and go back, so maybe the 17th.
That's what they requested.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It is.
Wasn't that a good idea that I
And the only thing is, that I think they're sending ending the 27th, they'll probably be ending the 29th because.
Right, they're not gonna take it down.
They're not gonna take it down on that Saturday.
And if it is a pain for the DPW, I'm sure I could get a crew from our track club to volunteer to put them up, but I don't know if we'd be allowed to do that on the post, so.
Probably not, because you need a bucket, you need to be up and it's on our property.
Right,
No
on
private
property
stuff.
and such.
Okay,
Okay,
so,
so is that a motion?
yep, I move approval for 20 or some amount to be determined by in terms of what, I don't know, with the scarecrows, we have to
Yeah,
make that work, but up to 20, no more than 20 of the signs to be put up the 17th through the 29th of October.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Glad that folks could weigh in on that who were in the room. In which case, we'll go back to the agenda. Report from Knott Beach, John Ramsey, Applied Coastal, Jim McLaughlin, DPW Engineering. Welcome. Oh, but is Mr. Texera here? I didn't see him. Great, yeah.
Madam Chair,
Welcome.
thank you. If I may start while
Please.
trying to get the computer working. James McLaughlin, Town Engineer, and we're here to present the report on the Knott Beach that was completed back at the end of June. Approximately a year ago, last fall, we received a grant from Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management to study the erosion along the Knott Beach and quantify it and look at alternatives to address the issue. And so we ended up hiring Applied Coastal Research and Engineering to model the erosion that has occurred and look at alternatives to address it, including do nothing alternative. So John Ramsey put together a slideshow that goes through the report and presents the findings for that. And obviously the intent is to protect the existing beach and enhance it. Also protect the roadway and its approach to the bridge over the Once Pond Inlet, which we're proposing to rebuild and extend the inlet, widen it to double its current width, and also the existing water main that's in the roadway. So those are the items that we're looking to protect through the alternatives that have been reviewed. And I'll let John Ramsey present his findings, and then we'll answer any questions you may have.
Sounds great. I also want to recognize Charlie McCaffrey from the Coastal Action Committee is in the room. We'll hear from later. Thank you, please.
Thank you. My name is John Ramsey, as Jim pointed out. So we took on a study over the past year, and this is sort of the first step in getting an idea about the whole thing about Knott Beach. One of the reasons why this came up, as Jim had pointed out, we've been working on the inlet widening project for several years. And really it came up as a good point as to make sure that as that goes forward, trying to get that inlet widened, is the last thing you want to have happen is build the bridge and then not have a road that connects it to the remainder of town. So one of the things we know this is a highly erosional area. We've been looking at it for I've been looking at it for the 25 years I've been in town. So it's certainly something that needs to be looked at. So with that, I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of history just so everybody has the background, go into how we analyze things, and I will gloss over it pretty quickly because I know it's late and I'm sure everybody wants to get home at some point. So the existing system, the way it is, and again, I know these pointers never work on, they never work on TV screens, so I have to do my hand motions. Obviously the system is a bit changed from what it was historically. We actually moved the inlet in 1985, and I'll go through that a little bit. But up there you see on the left side the location of the pre-1985 bridge. And that inlet was there for many decades. However, in 1844, the inlet was actually where it is now. So we actually, in 1985, the town decided to move it back where it historically had been and stabilize it there. One of the things that does is tends to make the system screwed up a little bit. This gives you sort of an idea of what the system used to look like in 1968 and why this whole thing came about. One of the things you notice is the road is, as you go to the east, is actually very close to falling in. There are some groins there holding some sand, but you really don't have a very wide beach there. But you do have a wide beach right around where the inlet is. Fast forward to the 1970s, that inlet started closing up, creating huge water quality problems, and hence why the inlet was moved in the first place. A lot of that was done with the concept that the inlet would be moved, but there was not a lot of thought as to what the coastal processes would do once you move something like that. And as we all know, living on the coast, if there's any action, there's always a reaction, and so that sort of gets us to what ends up happening. So the first thing, one of the smart things that was done when the inlet was moved is we moved the road back. They did realize that low-lying feature where the inlet had been was going to erode, and so they made the smart move of moving that road back, hence the location it is at. And if you go down to the beach now, one of the things you see is some of the old foundations and the old roadway sticking out onto the beach. So while we were smart enough to move that back, we probably should have removed a lot of that infrastructure at the same time, but we didn't do that. So this sort of gives you an idea, sort of a graphic idea of what's happened over time. And so the red lines are erosion, the blue lines are accretion. So this is between 1938 and 2014. And those red lines, the length of those lines, that if you go out to the outer limit, that's where the shoreline used to be. And the inner limit is where the shoreline is as of 2014. And then the blue lines are the opposite. So the shoreline was actually further back, and then it accreted. So those blue lines are actually, when we moved the inlet, one of the things that happened was we actually stabilized the shoreline, especially on the east side. So that shoreline since 1985 has become much more stable heading to the east. We did a more near term, so it looks less dramatic, but the rates are, the rate per year of erosion is still extremely high on the west side. That real hot spot has actually moved a little bit to the west. If you go down there now, you see, basically the parking lot is getting chewed away. Every year the beach committee goes and tries to restore that dune, but it really is fighting a losing battle. One of the things that we were tasked to do, and this goes back a little ways, was actually kind of getting an idea of how long it would be before the shoreline got to the road if we don't do anything. So those numbers you see are actually number, if we go with just the existing erosion rate, how many years, so this isn't before the road's inaccessible, this is when the shoreline actually gets to the road. So this is, it's going to become unusable long before that happens. And so when things that you see right at the west end of the parking lot is those numbers are 38 and 39 years when the shoreline would actually be right against the road. So we're looking at trying to get 50 to 75 years out of the bridge. Those don't equate very well. We certainly need to do something if we want to maintain this public access beach parking lot, as well as making sure that that bridge, which is an evacuation route, is maintained. One of the things that always comes up is our storms and how vulnerable we are. I know the town's in the process of doing a vulnerability assessment right now. One of the things that everybody should be aware, and we haven't had a major hurricane in a long time, and everybody, you can knock on wood, everybody talks about that we're overdue, and that may be true, but our last major hurricane was really 1954. We did have one in 61. Everybody talks about Hurricane Bob, but those were pretty minor storms relative to some of the major storms we had in the 30s, 40s, and early 50s. That top plot there is actually the storm surge of Woods Hole. You see kind of the tide just moving along, and each one of those lines is an hour in the vertical. And what ends up happening when we get a hurricane, everybody is focusing on Florence down in North Carolina right now, but those storms down south move relatively slowly. When we get a hurricane, it comes through here in about 3 or 4 hours. It's a huge surge, a lot of water. It comes through here like a freight train, and then it's gone, and the water drops away. The one thing that's good about that for us, obviously it increases wind speeds because it has a lot of forward motion. But one of the things that is good for us is that it never really gets the chance to develop a full sea state. So people, I see a lot of pictures from Hurricane Bob. The surge was tremendous, but you don't see a lot of pictures of huge waves because the waves really did not get a chance to form very well. We only have Vineyard Sound, and if it's traveling that fast, we just get this big up and down. This area, as in pretty much every area along the south coast of Falmouth, is extremely vulnerable. The surge is very high. This whole area goes underwater. So it shouldn't be a surprise that whether we get sea level rise, don't get sea level rise, this area is always going to be vulnerable. But at the same time, a lot of this is just roadway, and it can be fixed relatively easily. Once it gets overtopped, the storm goes up and back down. I'll try to avoid numbers. So this gives you an example of this 1944 hurricane. That's the Great Pond Bridge. You notice the bridge stayed in place, but this is before the seawall was built on the west side of there. And one of the things that happens is the water comes over, washes out the whole roadway, scours out down, and they basically went back within the next month or so and built the road back up, repaved it, and it was like it's kind of like what we see on Surf Drive after Sandy. So it's not not a big surprise. The road gets torn up, but I'm just more pointing this out that this is something that has nothing to do with sea level rise. This is something we've seen many, many times in this town. Not recently, not in a lot of people's memory, but it is something that historically happens, and I think it's something that as a town we should acknowledge that this is something we're going to be dealing with regardless of what happens with sea level rise and ongoing problems. So I just want to go through quickly some of the analysis we did, and I'm sorry for talking fast. I just know you guys don't want to be here.
You're right on.
Okay, so one of the things we do as coastal engineers, we go and do a lot of numerical modeling. We model waves, tides, currents, etc. So what we do is, for this type of process, we look at all of Vineyard and Nantucket Sound. We model the waves. We look at wave data offshore and go through that whole process. And the reason why we do that is we want to make sure that we're not only looking at extreme conditions, but we're also looking at day-to-day conditions that kind of control that everyday sediment movement that goes along the shoreline. And so we look at a lot of data. This is wind data on the left. It's a wind rose. It just shows you kind of the frequency of occurrence and magnitude of winds and where they come out of. That's from the Bucket Space Station. And one of the things you see is most of our winds come out of the west, and come out of the southwest. Even though they come out of the west, obviously we have a south-facing shoreline, so southwest is our dominant wind direction here. The bottom is actually tides. We did offshore and inshore tides within Bournes Pond. It's one of the things we were looking at. It just so happens we put the tide gauges out right before Sandy. So one of the things you see there is the storm surge from Sandy. That's that peak. And on the bottom plot, what we do is called detrending it. We take the tides all out, and we just are showing what the surge was. So everybody says Sandy was a horrible storm, but really there was only about 3 feet of surge in Sandy. So it wasn't, again, when we saw Hurricane 38, we had 10 or 11 feet of surge in the same area. So just give you a kind of idea of magnitude. Sandy did not go over the road. It basically got up to the road at a couple places around Bournes Pond. It did go over the road on Surf Drive. Because I was one of those runners that does these crazy races, now I'm too old to do that, but they had to repave the road before we could do Falmouth in the fall. So I remember that. So this gives you an idea of sort of what we call the bathymetry grid, or where the water depths in Nantucket Sound. This is something we run through our model. And this just gives you an idea of what our wave modeling results look like. Again, this is more of a pictorial. We have many, many thousands of points more than this, but it just sort of gives you an idea of the direction of waves and how things are influenced. And kind of what I said, when we see the kind of orange colors, those are the high waves, and this is an easterly, a southeast wave condition. But you notice the waves are very large outside the Sound, no big surprise. But the Sound does a great job of damping all the waves. and that happens in hurricanes or any major storm, we are blessed to be in a very, very protected environment. We have a low tide range, a very mild wave climate. It really allows us to do, from a coastal engineering perspective, allows us to do a lot of things relatively cheaply. And I will use that word relatively only because I do projects on the open coast where we would not get away with some of the things we can propose to a place like this. We also we get much more detailed when we get in close. So we kind of these big grid models, and then we subgrid them all the way in. So we're looking at very fine detail in close. And overall, we just end up, our big mission and for that whole process is to come up with sediment transport. And we want to get magnitude and direction. I know it's no surprise, sand goes from west to east on the shoreline. But we really want to look at the details, and I really wish this pointer worked. But one of the things that we see is that the sand transport, this is those arrows, the length of the arrows are the magnitude in the sand transport, and it gets larger and larger as you get closer and closer to the inlet. And on the other side, when you get to the east side, you get a slight reversal, and that happens around most inlets. You'll get that kind of shadowing by the jetties, and then you get a reversal of transport, and then it continues on. It goes into Eel Pond or Eel River. This sort of gives you an idea of this is that long-term results, but it does allows us to actually come up with a detailed look at how transport works with different alternatives and how those are going to work at protecting the road in the long run. We do more detailed analysis on that, and one of the things that the owners want to point out this is that I showed you what kind of the net transport is. It's west to east. We also look at, on occasion, it's east to west, and it looks like it's on the order of about less than a third comes back the other direction. It's when we easterly, we get a lot of transport over a very short period of time, but for the most part, everything is going back to the east. And so we do that kind of detailed analysis of east-west and net for that whole stretch of shoreline. And so one of the things we do with this is we want to use this as a predictive tool. So one of the things we do is we actually run a model that will predict how the shoreline is going to erode. So this gives you an idea of what the shoreline is going to do over a 10-year period. So the shoreline, we actually surveyed the shoreline, and that's since I'm colorblind, it's so terrible, but it's like a purple blue. And then the yellow line is where the shoreline would be in 10 years if we do nothing. So this gives you an idea as the shoreline marches back. And one of the things you notice is that area, we're worried about the area of the parking lot, which is certainly critical, and that gets to the road first, but it's the area further west that's eroding actually at a more rapid rate. So that's not just a public resource, I guess. There's also the natural resources of the plover habitat, et cetera, that's further to the west that is being impacted by that erosion. So what we did is we take all these models and we come up with that goal of trying to get to the point where we're coming up with a management solution that's going to last along those lines of that duration related to the bridge. So we're not trying to come up with a solution that's going to maintain this area forever, but we are trying to come up with something that maintains this in a time period associated with the bridge project. So this is something I always talk about, and it never seems to go very far. I don't know why. So everybody always looks at me and says, beach nourishment doesn't work. You put beach nourishment down, it just goes away. It instantly disappears. We in Massachusetts don't do a lot of large-scale beach nourishment projects. I'm involved with some. I do most of them out of state. But the one thing I will say is we have probably the poster child, best example of a beach nourishment project that's probably ever been done in any state, and we never talk about it. So when the harbor was improved in 1959, there was beach nourishment placed just east of the harbor. And that nourishment at the time, the casino, as we knew it before they improved it, the piles were actually in the water. So at the time when they did this nourishment back in the late 50s, after the 38 and 44 hurricanes, that beach had eroded tremendously. They put that beach nourishment in, and that area, as you notice those blue lines, means that it's accreted. That's that nourishment that was placed. And it has eroded, but it's still there. So that area has nourishment all the way down to the Little Pond entrance, where Little Pond has to get dredged out every once in a while, but that whole stretch, and that was not part of the nourishment, it's drifted there since the 50s. But that nourishment is actually protected, that entire area for that length of time. So when we're talking about beach nourishment, when I look at it, it says shore protection. It's not just that beneficial reuse where you just drop it on the beach and let it supply the downriver system. But when we're talking about it, we look at it at the type of scale where you actually are preventing waves from overtopping and trying to reduce the erosion rate in a proactive way. So I just wanted to point that out because that's one of the things that coastal zone management is always going to ask us to look at because it's a soft solution, has less impact. But one of the issues that came up early on when we were discussing this, the Conservation Commission was concerned because back in 2009, when Woods Hole was dredged, if you remember, they put that nourishment material from Woods Hole, they put it just to the west of the inlet. And at the time, it didn't stay very long, but one of the concerns was how much of that material ended up inside Bourne's Pond. And there was not enough information to really figure that out, but there was always kind of this anecdotal feeling that had created an adverse impact. So it was something that we were very aware of. And so we wanted to look at, if you just did nourishment, what would happen. And I guess I can walk out here because I'm not on the microphone. But, so one of the things, so if we put this nourishment out here, this yellow line, one of the things that happens, after 10 years, it roads back to the red line. But one of the issues, here's the line now, one of the issues right here is that the shoreline actually moves out. And what that does is it creates that infilling of that last compartment, and that is going to go into the inlet. So one of the big concerns, if you just do nourishment alone, that yes, it does protect the road, it gives us that life, and after a while you're going to have to refill it after 10 years, a portion of it's going to have to be refilled, but you're also going to exacerbate shoaling inside the inlet and kind of create a maintenance nightmare for yourself. So that, we looked at that as an alternative. We looked at many, many alternatives. As you notice, this alternative is actually W. We labeled it A through many other things. But I just want to, kind of present this one as kind of the optimal nourishment that would protect the road for the time period that we were looking at. So one of the things we looked at was actually adding structures. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute more. But again, the do nothing, it drops back to that yellow line back there, but if we put these in, it only drops back to here. And then that ends up becoming stable. One of the things you saw in the previous, after they moved the inlet in 1985, you saw to the east of the inlet, all that area kind of remained stable. As long as you're maintaining material feeding into it, groins are kind of a bad idea in general, but as long as you're keeping everything filled to entrapment, as they call it, it can continue to pass sediment at the rate that it's passing now, everything is kind of maintained status quo. So you kind of load up those groin cells and allow it to work and then maintain the parking lot in the long term. So we looked at, again, dozens and dozens of options of this, but this is the one that really kind of gave us that long-term protection. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what it looks like. This is going back to I believe the 1965 photo. And one of the things you see here, this is the old road, but one of the things you see is this armoring along the road. And that is actually Jim's crew, actually. This is actually their survey of the armoring that's in the water. So this is actually just laying there now. And if you go out there, if you go off the beach, you actually run into stone that's out in the water. So one of the things that we've had success with talking to agencies is actually doing what's called structure trading. The agencies don't like you to create new structures. Nobody wants new structures in the engineering or in the environment. However, they're also acknowledging that things were never optimally designed back when all this stuff was put in. It was usually haphazard over the years. And so one of the things that we would suggest doing is actually removing all of this armoring.
Repurpose it.
And repurpose it for what we need to do in order to maintain the system. Now, it's not a done deal or anything, but it's certainly a successful approach that's been used. And there are other things to clean up there too. There's some house foundations, et cetera, that you've seen sticking on the beach. But there's certainly a lot of this is acting as coastal engineering structures now. There's an abutment that's sticking out on the beach. And actually, if you just take a look at the same picture on modern day photograph, you see that all that's in the water. Our shoreline is back here now. These structures look like they're large and pretty close, but if you go out to this structure right now, that's all buried. So, and the same thing would be here. So the only part that's sticking out is that part that's, that's beyond the beach, and then this would be filled upstream of it. So you would not be looking at a major structure. These are the same size as the structures that are already there.
Has such repurposing been permitted elsewhere in Massachusetts?
It has. So there's an example, actually, at Rushing Marsh that was done, and we're actually, right now, we're looking at it for New Bedford. So it's not something that, and actually, I can say we did it in Winthrop as well. So it's not something that's unheard of, but it is, they want to make sure that you're not adding to the problem. And I think in this case, these structures are dilapidated, not doing anything, and actually, I think with the asbestos water line, et cetera, they're pretty much a hazard for anything else. So just the conclusions, hopefully the takeaway, obviously it was that 1985 movement of the inlet that really, and I didn't describe it in great detail, but when you move that inlet, there's a shoal offshore, and that shoal for a while protected things, but as that sediment kind of got used up and started moving away, then that shoreline all of a sudden started receding very rapidly. So you kind of had a protection for a while, then you lost it. We're a great environment from a wave standpoint. So one of the things I can say is, like the Winthrop project we worked on, that was about 500,000 cubic yards, 500,000 cubic yards. It was thousands and thousands of truckloads of material. This is not a small project, but we're looking at somewhere around 30,000 cubic yards. It's a much more manageable number. It has even a better design life because the waves do not transport material nearly as fast here. For example, the transport rates are somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 cubic yards per year. Where, like, you go to the National Seashore, you're looking at more like 500,000 cubic yards per year. So it makes a huge difference. We are susceptible to storms. We're always going to be. Our whole town is in that situation now. We're going to be in the future. So transport direction, I think, is pretty obvious. Just sort of coming up with this concept that beach nourishment, I think any option that you look at here, you're going to need beach nourishment. If you're considering structures, you need to enhance with beach nourishment. The requirement always is, if you add these structures, that you're going to have to fill them to entrapment and make sure that they don't have any downdrift impact. That's kind of a given in regulatory ease these days. By itself, it's problematic, but if you kind of optimize structures, you can make it work for a significant long period of time, certainly at the design life of the bridge. And certainly within the next 15 to 75 years, if we're looking at 1 to 2 feet of sea level rise, it's not going to change that either. The one thing that's nice about nourishment, it's easy to build up as the barrier beach changes. And so with periodic nourishment, it's a good long-term solution. And then just next steps, we're looking at finalizing the exceptional size, moving forward with permitting, final design, and eventually, hopefully, into construction. The ideal thing would be to do it at the same time the bridge contractors out there. We're much further forward, obviously, in permitting with the bridge than we are with this. But those would be the next steps the town wants to pursue them. And with that.
Great report. Questions, anybody? Charlie, do you want to come up and for coastal action? Thank you, Mr. Cochran. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We don't have anything to add tonight, but we have heard from John. All members of the committee have been reading the report. We've discussed it at the last meeting. We'll discuss it again tomorrow. And what we will do is get you comments before 2 weeks from now when we have a status report on the committee. So you'll have some written comments from us before that meeting.
Appreciate that.
Before,
Sure, for Charlie, sure, Sam?
Perhaps for both of you, but John is recommending, that we really take some additional action rather than just simply raising that bridge deck and widening it. How close is the Coastal Resiliency Action Committee coming to actually making a proposal that we move forward on a project?
Well, I think what John has proposed is reasonable to protect the road. as he indicated, there may be some question about the groins, though they do provide some benefit. I think some of the questions will be, if you protect the road with this, that's good. But there's probably other issues in Minot Beach that need to be addressed that haven't been addressed yet. So that needs to be looked at. And we'll get more information from the Woods Hole Group vulnerability study. But John's analysis of the wave action, the sediment transport, all those factors that indicate that nourishment here would be effective seems quite valid.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I just wanted to say, just the forethought, I think, should be commended in terms of looking at this major, bridge project that, is part of our continuing effort toward water quality, and to have some kind of thinking ahead where you mesh these goals together, I mean, and look at, well, what needs to happen if we're gonna redo a bridge or inlet widening, and what are the concerns that are gonna come up at the same time. And I think that the fact that these are being coordinated is really huge. I'm just a little curious about, what do you think the added price tag will be? I think it's
Had to ask me.
it makes a lot of sense, as you do with any big building project, to look at the longevity and to try to coordinate things. But I was just curious if, with your other experiences there, what should we expect in terms of
Yeah, so
coordination?
we're looking at somewhere, slightly north of $1 million to do the work. The bridge is in the $5.5 million range. So I think that, so it certainly would raise the price tag a bit. And I would have to, well, I had forethought in this. It wasn't my forethought that really pushed this. I mean, RAJAC, came through when we were talking about it. It became a big concern early on in the bridge project. It did take a while for us to pull together the concept of getting some money, and CCM supported this 75%, which is great, to go through this process. But I think that forethought was, any of these projects, this is a tough thing, because obviously the water quality issue was front and center for a while, and it still is. But I think that it's all of these inlets, any of the inlets with water quality, the concept of sediment transport and beach nourishment, and whether the inlet's going to clog or not, and how well you keep it open is a concern, throughout the coast here.
Along those lines, just one more question. So Woods Hole is looking at, when they develop their dock, they're looking at various, plan A, B, and C, so to speak. One of the plans was to build for, say, 20-year sea level rise, and I'm kind of just paraphrasing, and then to have a mechanism where it's built up, if need be, at that point in time, rather than building up for, say, 40 years sea rise level. Should we be looking at some of those considerations in the bridge design? Maybe Jim, you want to?
This is a tough one. So we talked about this, and Jim's newer. We talked about this in the bridge design, and there were a lot of issues related to the community and how much, I know the Water Quality Committee went through this, how many issues there were when they went through the 85 bridge project process, and how the community didn't want to see they saw the Great Pond Bridge and how massive that was. They were very much against that concept. The bridge I think the bridge deck's going up a little bit. But again, one of the things I point out is, in my view, going up a couple feet doesn't really do you that much good, because the storms are so far over the road. It's like kind of rolling the dice of when you get a storm. We've been pretty lucky and we haven't had one, but I think this whole area, going up a foot or two, isn't, that kind of fight this might not be the place to do that.
So it's just more economical to rebuild rather than try to,
Well, I guess you think about it, it's easy to say we can go up, But the one thing I can say, and I know that there's a bunch of grants out there now talking about raising roads and salt marshes. All of a sudden you start impacting salt marsh. I mean, it becomes this quagmire that the state is just not ready to deal with. So it's nice to say it, and it's nice to come up with some of these concepts, but we're dealing with the road in Venice right now. It's our project, and we wanted to actually move the road back into the salt marsh on the salt hay dike, and there's no way. They prefer us to build roads right now, but there's a kind of infighting in the state. Unfortunately, I'm being recorded, but I mean, it's difficult. I mean, these permitting issues are complicated, and getting in front of sea level rise and coastal resilience is a challenging issue.
Still learning, Megan?
Well, just in this particular, part of town, there isn't a lot of wiggle room. I mean, that piece of land is so narrow, and the part that's covered, there's not a lot of options in terms of what you do with the road there. I mean, you really don't have that many options. I mean, obviously, you always have the option to kind of build up, but like you said, you're literally just right on that. You're right on the water on Bourne Pond on one side, and you're really, so the options are somewhat limited. But what I like about this presentation is just that it kind of, it offers folks that idea that this is going to be an ongoing process. There's no single, one-time fix, because that's just not how the shoreline works. But that there's some kind of those softer fixes with beach nourishment, potentially paired with some kind of more long-term projects. I think it's a nice balance, and I think people need to, I hope that this will be somewhat available on our website somewhere, because I think it's helpful for people to just continue to wrap our head around the concept that this is going to be an ongoing challenge that the town just continues to mitigate, and it'll never be one single fix, but that everything isn't a $30 million project. I mean, there are some things that we already do beach nourishment. There are some of these things we already know how to do that can help to mitigate some of those, some of that erosion. So it's very helpful.
It's kind of nice to know that Martha's Vineyard is breaking the waves before they get
Just keep it there. Just keep it there.
That was great. Jim, did you have any follow-up or anything else?
No, I'm thankful for both John and Charlie's input.
John, really great presentation. A lot of productive work there, much appreciated, all the way up to M or whatever version. W, I think we saw. Oh, W, there we go. Thanks so much, and we'll look forward to more discussion on this. As Megan said, Charlie?
Just one point. This is just the beginning of the issues that you're going to have to face in the long term. We have 95 miles of shoreline. All of it presented one challenge or another in terms of resiliency. And it's going to be important also for you to begin to come up with some basic policies and approaches that will add some consistency, so it's not we have to do this here because we're widening the inlet now. We need to begin to get ahead of the issues, and I'm hoping that the Woods Hole study will give us a town-wide assessment of where our vulnerabilities are, so that we can set some priorities.
Just to that point, I think you're on target with having that inventory and an assessment of sort of all of those vulnerable points, and then then you're better equipped to make those decisions that this particular area, will have a more expensive or involved, option that we need to follow. I think it's really, it's helpful to have that, because you do have to see the big picture. I mean, it's not going to be a single, project that we're working on.
And in seeing the big picture, we probably have to have a different vision of our entire coastline, how we expect it to look by the end of the century. And that it's not all negative. We try, how can we envision our adaptation will have positive elements. And how do we find those positive elements of a better environment and more access?
We always talk about climate change as a negative, but
right.
I will say that I'm looking forward to the mahi-mahi that are going to show up this year.
On that note, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Next, we have number 4 under business, review, vote, and approve 2018-2019 shellfish regulations. Great, welcome.
Good evening, I'm filling in for Chuck, who's recovering from surgery. These are the standard regulations we bring before you every fall, knowing that lots of areas in town open up on October 1st. Basically, if you look through this package, it's very similar to last year with date changes.
Appreciate that. Nice package. Are there any particular questions?
Approval of the 2019 shellfish regulations too. Since there are no significant changes besides updating the dates.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Thanks for waiting through this. Appreciate that. Next, we have Jeremiah's status report on Dutch elm disease downtown. Welcome.
Good evening. So I'm here to report about 3 diseased elm trees on Main Street. I have a handout here if I could pass it out.
That'd be great.
It's really noticeable. It already makes it look like we're halfway through fall when you drive down. Thank you.
Nice here. Thank you.
So the first one you can see is at the post office. That is positive for Dutch elm disease. The next one at Maxwell Company, also positive for Dutch elm disease.
This is a silly question.
Yep.
Is there like some kind of vaccination or treatment? If we see this starting on certain major trees, is there a way to treat it, stop it?
So what we do every year, we treat our trees.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a vaccination, but it's not 100%. And the first tree, actually, we've never vaccinated because it's not ours. So that's the one that originally got it, and then it spread.
Oh, and that's the post office?
That's the post office.
Okay.
So that spread to the Maxwell Company one. And then the third one isn't Dutch elm, but it's something else. And we need to act on that soon as well because it could, fall apart. That's got something called phomopsis. That's not what killed it. That was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. Before that, it had something called verticillium wilt. We've been keeping it alive for the past couple of years. And it's 2 years of drought, and then this finally killed it.
Mr. Suso, do you want to, I think it makes sense to take the post office one separately. I know you've been in touch with Congressman Keating and just trying to.
Sure.
Do you want to just update us on your efforts in that regard?
Well, yeah, I'm just happy to confirm that, as you've indicated, I've reached out to the Congressman's office due to the great efforts of Jeremiah and Peter in Public Works. The postmaster was contacted and indicated, understandably, that the budget for the main post office here in Falmouth does not have funds to accommodate the removal of a dead tree like this, and which is why I've reached out to the congressman to appeal for securing special funds from Uncle Sam for this important removal before we have to approach and make a more difficult decision about repairing a significantly damaged main post office and or other structures in that area, as I think we're all aware, given the size of that, the commanding size of that tree. The response so far has just been that they're reviewing all options and will get back to me. And so I'll be contacting them again this week to ask for any update because I know that Jeremiah will confirm this is significantly time sensitive. And thankfully, with Jeremiah's able help, we can deal with those trees that are within the town's right of way. But this one that is on post office property, we're hoping to have be able to team up and partner with the federal government to take that down properly.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's so expensive because post office is open every day, and to take a tree down like that, keeping all the people there, you need a lot of details. You need people directing people, cars, Main Street. It's a huge tree. So And with Maxwell and Company, that one's gonna be a hard one to remove as well. We're gonna have to, have a lot of police details for that.
What's
Wood,
the-
of course, has to go buried.
Yes, after everything that we can chip is chipped, it all has to be buried.
And what are you thinking of in terms of replacements? Have you had any early thoughts on that?
Well, with Maxwell and Company and Chapman Cole and Gleason, I don't know if I would replace it with, say, an American elm. Both of those trees are so stressed because they're surrounded by asphalt. There's no place for them to grow. So I wouldn't want to put a tree back in its place that's going to have that problem down the road. So I'm thinking about other options or other varieties of trees that can handle such a small space. There's really not that many, but I am thinking about different options there. If not, if we might not plant in that same spot, we could always replace it somewhere else. So.
Okay, any other questions? This is just an update report.
Do we
There's no action.
we don't need an action yet?
No, it's just a status update from Jeremiah and Peter, to let you know what we're doing and the fact that action is going to have to be taken sooner rather than later, particularly the ones that are totally within the town's purview.
And with the next, I was just going to say.
Our understanding, and it's a great question, I've spoken to Peter and Jeremiah, contacted them. My understanding is that would not require a formal.
No, not a shade tree hearing. No. There's nothing we can do. They're gone, so we can't mitigate it. It's a hazard.
Thank you very much for the
You're welcome.
report. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Peter. Thanks, Jim.
Next, we have an annual committee appointment. Veterans Council Committee, Robert Texera, term June 30th, 2019.
Madam Chair, I
Yes.
apologize. Can I make one other comment?
Sure.
Just while Jeremiah and Peter are still here.
Gentlemen?
Just to acknowledge, and I know some questions from the selectmen already confirmed this, but we're so fortunate to have had these trees as long as we have, particularly those within the public domain, and that's not, obviously the one in the post office is not. But it's because of the diligent work of Public Works in preserving these American treasures. My understanding generally is that Falmouth has more of these American elms than just about any other community in the Commonwealth. Sadly, our inventory is going to shrink because of this, but I know I've personally witnessed Public Works working with consulting crews as well to do these annual treatments to which Jeremiah is referring. And it's fairly complex and time consuming. A lot of you have to dig around all the roots. But what it's resulted in is us being able to enjoy these treasured tree species for longer probably than any other communities around. So I just wanted to mention that, or reinforce it, to applaud the great efforts of our skilled professionals.
Well,
Thank you for that.
And the timely removal of them is what allows some of the other ones to stay healthy.
Correct, well said, so that the disease won't spread.
We've probably gotten 25 to 30 years of life out of these trees that would have gone much faster.
Yeah. They've been treating them since the 50s.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a lot. Back to Veterans Council Committee.
Move that we appoint Robert Texera to the term ending June 30th, 2019.
Second.
Representative Clark Hatted and the American Legion Post.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have an announcement of a revision to the November 2018 annual town meeting schedule. Mr. Suso, if you, okay, sure.
However you'd like me to.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
Selectman English Brown, happy to have you carry it.
Sure, just noting there's a single change.
Go for it.
For the date for selectmen vote, article recommendations, it will be Monday, August 1st. Excuse me, October, really giving us a lot of time. October 1st, 2018, rather than September 24th. So we're moving it out to October 1st.
And just to interject, if I might, the driving force for that is allowing the board to hear the reports on the petition articles at your next regular meeting on the 24th. And traditionally, you tried to wait to the next meeting to actually vote those articles. So this formally gives you that opportunity.
Great.
And I think that's consistent with the way you prefer to operate. So
Absolutely.
Second on that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. Next, we have minutes of meetings. First, the public session for June 18, 2018.
Madam Chair,
Please.
on the first page, number 2, should say acting chair English Bracken.
Yes.
I don't think you were here. That's the first one, and then, let's see, I have several more. And I can make it, well, sorry, let me get to that. Okay, on page 8, in the very first paragraph, it says, Mr. Patterson, motion to appoint Mr. Case and Mr. Dalton and Mr. Crossan as constables with terms ending June 30th, 2018. I think that's an incorrect date, and it's also true in the next paragraph too, or next motion. I don't know what the end of that term is, but it's not June 30th.
Let's hold these and make those 2 corrections with staff, and then we'll bring them back. Any other changes?
No, that's.
All right, we'll hold that one. Next, we have the executive session for June 18, 2018. Being prepared.
And that's being prepared.
And then we have the executive session for August 6, 2018.
I would move approval and not release.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have individual selectmen reports. Mr. Patterson.
First one. Just a quick report on the NOPSCA efforts to turn the current Keeper's House into a educational maritime museum. They've raised about 40% of the funds to accomplish that. The tower is completed now, in case you haven't been in it. So that piece is behind it, but the committee is moving rapidly. They have a very professional and effective development team with lots of experience. So that challenge of the final 60% looks quite doable. It's going to take a lot of solicitation. In addition to that, that's just the construction cost. They're looking at the operational issues and looking at building essentially a trust or endowment fund that would pay for ongoing maintenance and management of the facilities, because we want it to be an open educational program for school children, Native American, Native Falcon residents, and then all those visitors that come through as well. Had a lot of attendance this summer, and just to remind everybody, the tower it is still open through, I think, Columbus Day is the plan, on Tuesdays and Thursdays from noon to 2. If anybody wants to actually go into it, see the beautiful brickwork on the inside, and actually you're capable of climbing up to the lighthouse. It's all part of the tour. Yeah, it's the best view on Cape Cod, because you're looking out over the Martha's Vineyard and the Elizabeth Islands, and even across the other side of Buzzards Bay. And when you go up to the Highland Light, all you see is ocean on one side. So,
Well, that's
fine fish anyway. I also attended a briefing along with Julian and Peter and Tom Bott and Jennifer Petit of a state delegation of people who are introducing the PACE program. And I'd like to just read it to you so you know what it is, because it's got one paragraph that clearly, PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, all right? PACE, Massachusetts, is for commercial buildings or for nonprofits, is a new mechanism to finance energy improvements such as energy efficiency projects, which includes windows and roofs and insulation, renewable energy sources, and gas line extensions, and both on commercial and industrial properties as well as not-for-profit institutional properties. So it's not government properties. It's to finance improvements, a property owner agrees to a betterment assessment on a property which repays the financing. This approach enables owners to undertake more comprehensive energy upgrades with longer payback periods of up to 20 years. At property sale, the lien stays with the property and is transferred to the subsequent property owners. So that's the program. It's new. It hasn't actually been rolled out yet. They have, I think, 12 municipalities that basically opted in. Our challenge will be able to handle the accounting, because this is a betterment that actually becomes a lien on the property, so we have all that building process that takes place. And I know Jennifer was really defensive about even thinking about it because we're not sure that our accounting software called SoftWrite can easily be modified to accommodate this kind of thing. But it's certainly a part of the, this is a mass development program. So it's part of the state's trying to incentivize conservation and, eventually, trying to move toward renewable energy generation within the state of Massachusetts, in each of the municipalities. So that's.
But no funding attached to it?
No, the funding would be through third-party lenders that actually provide the construction funds, if you will. But it's the way that private entities and the not-for-profit entities, and we have a number of them that would qualify. The minimum is a $250,000 investment, so this is not small homeowner type of upgrades or projects. This is a larger scale thing. Well, we have, UWI and MBL, and we have Cape Cod Healthcare, and maybe Associates of Cape Cod, the Grant Lab, so to speak, and some larger institutions here in town that probably would be able to take on projects of this scale. So that's a program that they were briefing us on. And it's moving through the point of operation. As I've said, approximately 12 municipalities have said, yeah, we're going to participate in that. And it's going to be an option for us in the future. Okay.
Thank you.
And then the last thing I might mention is that I enjoyed a great Labor Day weekend because I had family from Georgia all the way through Portland, Maine, and most of the states in between when my wife and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. So it was a special weekend. So if I wasn't very actively involved in town business for the week before and after, well, my apologies.
Oh, sounds like you're understandable. Ms. Brada?
No, just a recognition that everybody's back to school and, with a new superintendent and a lot of kind of new changes for our schools. Everything I've heard so far has been very positive, and so hopefully that'll everyone will continue to get back into the swing of homework and earlier bedtimes and all of that. So
it's great to see the enterprise with the superintendent on the bus and teachers.
Exactly.
Welcoming. Yeah, absolutely. Doug?
I've got some quizzes to write.
Yeah. Mr. Suso, Town Manager's
Sure.
report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Just a reminder to all, I know we're being taped, but for the few that are still with us and those who might get the word out, in addition, we have our annual solemn September 11th ceremony hosted by the fire department as in the past, and that will be at 9:45 a.m. Tomorrow, September 11th. At the headquarters fire station on Main Street. So we look forward to any and all who have the opportunity to join us for that very short but important solemn anniversary ceremony and that observance for all the first responders and others whose lives were lost so tragically on that day. That concludes my report.
And I think just to that point, I think, I don't know if Sam is able to go, but I know I'll be there tomorrow representing the board. So it really is a really moving tribute, and it's nice to see that we have people from the community come, and every year we have folks who are just visiting, who are tourists here, who then, because it's kind of in such a prominent spot, join in that ceremony, which is just kind of a nice active community. So I will be there for the board.
Great job. Yeah. Appreciate that.
I'll be there also.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnson-Scott.
Just one brief note of disappointment. As the board may recall, Carla Ferroni, our housing coordinator, and I worked with Pat Harris in an attempt to save one of our affordable housing units from foreclosure. That was through a court action, and there was a brief period of time where it seemed like we had a willing partner in Citibank, but unfortunately, they ultimately decided to press the matter in court, and they did prevail yesterday. Our injunction was denied by the judge. So that that mortgage was increased in our view beyond what was allowed by the deed, and we challenged that and lost that challenge. And the deed is one of the problematic deeds from yesteryear, which does not survive foreclosure. So not without a valiant effort, but that one is gonna be lost.
Sorry
What
about
was
the
the,
news.
what was the court that actually heard the case?
Superior.
Sadly, I should note also that just to add to Peter's comments, we're very disappointed that the state housing agency did not team up with us on that. They, even the court remarked that they were remarkably silent.
That was mass housing.
Yeah, mass housing, pardon me, and they were a no-show effectively. And we had appealed to them to partner with us. So tragically, that sends out a message that certainly is different from what I've heard from elsewhere in the Commonwealth, so very troubling.
Well, housing is so key to just our, the town's, current survival, and, these are important assets we're trying to protect for Falmouth, so I know I speak for the whole board in appreciating all of those efforts, and that, going forward, we just redouble our efforts and continue to improve and grow the stock.
I move we adjourn.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.